Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another exciting episode of Timcast IRL. In today's news, Fox News agrees to match employee donations to the Satanic Temple, Trevor Project, and Planned Parenthood. A new Gallup poll finds that belief in God has reached a new low. I guess we've reached a lot of new lows in this country lately. And the DOJ is going to sue Texas for their immigration policies, or at least the way that they intend to enforce those. But first, I'm going to ask all of you to smash that like button and become members at timcast.com. If you become members at timcast.com, you're going to get access to the after show where we are uncensored. You'll also be helping us to build culture and help grow the empire. We're also shouting out a member tonight and a business he started. We're thankful for his support, and we want to show some mutual love. GC Windsor Contemporary Neckties and men's fashion accessories. Check out this upgrade to the necktie. The GC Windsor, which never sacrifices tradition or integrity. The creator, Jeffrey De La Nuez, is one of our members and someone we're happy to support. So visit the website at gcwindsor.com to see the vast array of combinations available and see why GC Windsor will reinvigorate professional fashion once again. By going to his website, you can sign up for the newsletter and pre-order the sets. Joining us today is writer, radio talk show host, presidential candidate. He even has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, the one and only Larry Elder. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Did that sound sincere?
Absolutely. It was totally sincere.
Good. Got off to a good start.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're so happy to have you here today. I'm Hannah Claire Brimlow. I'm a writer for Timcast.com, and on this Friday, I hosted Culture War in Tim's absence. So I'm grateful for all of you who tuned in, and I am so happy to be joined by one of my favorite people, Brett Dasovic.
Oh. Hello, yes, I'm Brett Dasovic. I am the host of Pop Culture Crisis, Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. right here on YouTube.com.
And I am Serge.com. That episode of Culture War was spicy, wasn't it?
Serge and I just went through some stuff this morning.
Yeah, it was a lot.
It was a battle in here.
Yeah. Anyways, take it away, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive right into our first story here. Fox News has said they will match employee donations to Satanic Temple, the Trevor Project, Planned Parenthood, and the SPLC. Unbelievable. All the organizations, of course, that we would hope Fox would be against because they stand for all of the things that Fox's audience wants destroyed in the United States. But here we are. Whistleblowers from Fox News have revealed that the company uses an app called Fox Giving to match employee donations to approved organizations, which again include the Satanic Temple, the Trevor Project, which, by the way, for those of you who have been following the show, know has a chat room portal that they advertise to minors that allows for you to speak to an adult about your sexual identity. And if you hit the escape button 3 times, it clears your entire browser history. Cool.
Is that the one with that Daniel Radcliffe speaks for on a regular
Project,
basis?
that's
Yeah.
Radcliffe.
Okay.
Yeah, so if that's not bad enough, of course, they're also matching donations to Planned Parenthood and the SPLC. They're willing to match donations up to $1,000. So the whistleblowers took the story to The Blaze, which reports that Fox is going to subsidize some of the very activist groups that despise and seek to ruin the network's viewers, evidencing a complete disregard and hatred for its core audience. We've seen a lot of shenanigans from the people over at Fox lately. Them getting rid of Tucker Carlson was certainly, in my estimation, a blunder on their part. I also think it was bad for the American people. The way I've described this in the past is that CNN tells you what you're supposed to believe, and then Fox exists to tell you what you're allowed to believe. If you're not going to swallow what they're trying to give you over at CNN, Fox offers you this alternative that's still somewhat market safe, it's still somewhat PC, and they tell you this is the outer limit, this is the boundary. Once you've hit this, you can't go further to the right, or else you're a nut job and a conspiracy theorist. Part of the value of Tucker Carlson on that network was that he pushed that Overton window further to the right. They got rid of him. That is one step that Fox News has taken, and what I would argue is a long series of steps to insult their core audience and harm the movement. What do you guys think?
My first question is, what did Fox say in response to the Blaze piece? Did they put out a statement? Did they deny it? Did they confirm it?
I haven't seen any comments from them yet. And I will say there are a lot of corporations that offer this type of match giving, right? So
Yeah.
Google did this for a long time. And I know that there were cases of employees opting to donate to conservative causes. And Google said, no, we won't do it. And so for me, I don't personally know the whistleblower at Fox, but I would love to see what organizations Fox is denying. If they're saying yes to the SPLC, if they're saying yes to Planned Parenthood, if they're saying yes to the Satanic Temple, who are they also saying yes to, and who are they saying no to?
It's just hard for me to believe that Fox would do that, particularly with an organization like SPLC. I mean, this is an organization that once called Dr. Ben Carson a hate monger. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a little skeptical. I'd like to see what Fox has said in response, because there are a lot of people that are mad at Fox, and they come forward, they give a story, and next thing you know, people run with it. So I'm skeptical all the time, and I'm skeptical about this too.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a prudent approach to take, to wonder what their statement is, and I guess we'll see how they respond to this. I've definitely been disturbed by some of what Fox has done in the past year, but I would agree with you, that's probably a safe course of action.
And clearly, I'm upset about Tucker Carlson not being there.
Yeah,
I announced for president on April 20th, which turned out to be Tucker Carlson's neck to the last show. By the way, I started not to announce on April 20th because that's Hitler's birthday. I'm a little suspicious about that. Yeah. And we started to put it off for 1 week. I'm happy we didn't, because then we would have been on somebody else's show. We ended up being on the highest rated show in the prime time.
So you believe that Fox is essentially, it's the outer limits of what you're allowed to believe publicly without being considered like far right, like
I
do not pass go, do not become OAN.
Yeah, well, I think that's one way of looking at it. They're sort of, they're conservative. I think they're probably more in line with establishment conservatism, but people see them as safer, I think. So Fox, as compared to, an organization that you mentioned, One America Network, or some of these other networks and online publications, has somewhat of an increased level of credibility in the mainstream, I would say.
Tim, I have to raise a question.
Yes, of course.
Do we have to question this?
Do we call him Tim?
We're all Tim tonight.
We're all Tim tonight.
We're all
Okay,
Tim.
okay, I see.
It's Tim time.
What about me?
You're Larry.
I'm the
Yeah,
black,
you're the one and only.
If you want to be Tim,
I'm the black Tim of white supremacy.
Yes.
Look, hey, if you want to be the black Tim of white supremacy, you're more than
Thank you.
welcome.
You can join
Appreciate
us. To both of my Tims, the thing is, I do feel as though I have to raise a question of First Amendment rights, right? So, and I'm not an expert in this, but if a company offers to match your giving, if it's wrong for Google to say we won't match your gift to a right-wing organization we disagree with, is it wrong for Fox to say we won't give money to a left-wing organization that you choose to patronize? It is surprising to me that someone who wants to give money to the SPLC works at Fox, but you never know. Some people want to bring it into media.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people
impossible.
in media who are on the left. Just like there are people who work for some left-wing organizations who are more conservative and just don't talk about it. I would suspect it's the case that there are left-wing people who work for Fox and aren't super open about it, or maybe they are more open about it. I've never been to their studio. What I will say is there's two different ways to look at your question here. There's the legal question and there's the moral question. I can't answer the legal question. I'm sure Larry was more equipped to answer that one. But in terms of the moral question, I don't think there's anything wrong with Fox saying, no, we would be unwilling to match a donation to organizations that despise our viewers and everything we stand for.
I mean,
but legally, I'm curious what you'd have to say about that.
It's a private company. I would see no reason why they can't have a policy like that. We're not going to match to organizations we don't like, and that assault our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. So you brought up a story with Google, and you asked if it's okay in both circumstances. I'm curious what the fallout ended up being for Google.
Well, with Google, I know this story personally. For some of these employees, they battled through and got the donations, but obviously then had a target on their back, right? They were then a band of people who believed in the wrong organization. So it is a question of what the repercussions are. I tend to agree with you. If they're a private company, perhaps they should have value, and I think it would show integrity to what they presume to represent in this country. Of course, I think Fox has done some good things. I think there are things that I question. Of course, it is a major corporation, and I think ultimately it serves its bottom line, which is a reality of their business. And so it's not.
Imagine being like in an industry full of people where you're like, maybe you're like the one right wing guy at CNN. Imagine being the one left wing guy at Fox News. You're just the one guy hanging out there. That doesn't sound like.
Well, there are people like that. I mean, that's what Project Veritas found out about CNN.
Yeah.
A couple of people were on tape, and they were upset about Jeffrey Zucker and about how every morning he would have a 9:00 meeting or whatever hour it was, basically telling people what to say. And this guy was ticked off about it. He said he had a personal vendetta against Donald Trump, tell us just what to say, to the exclusion of other issues. There are people within probably every organization that feels that way.
Do you think that the trajectory Fox has been on, where they've lost some of the support, since the election and what's going on now, so obviously since Tucker has gone, does that fall in line kind of with Project Veritas since the exit of James O'Keefe, where I see people, like I still follow Project Veritas on social media, but I don't see the same kind of vigor for the cause that you saw there before? Like it feels like they've lost the momentum that they had before?
Well, in my opinion, it's hard to say that people like Mark Levin or Sean Hannity are not aggressive and not passionate. They are. But I do think Fox underestimated how popular Tucker Carlson was and how much he meant to the whole organization. It reminds me of when Johnny Carson was on late night, And when he'd go on vacation, the Today Show or whatever show it was in the morning, I think it was Today Show, would have lower ratings.
Oh, I meant more like the audience vigor. Like I don't see the same. Like I felt like the support behind those organizations from their audience feels like it's been.
The ratings show that.
Yeah.
The ratings are down almost 50%.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a good point. For me, Fox is interesting for a lot of reasons. One of the things that I would question is if the audience are reacting to the content, and the content is ultimately driven by executive decisions. And of course, we'd have to kind of examine what's going on with the Murdoch family to completely understand the direction that Fox is taking. And I'm not sure how to speculate on that, but I know that, as leadership changes hands, of course, there can be questions about the direction of the network, right? I also find that, again, I think there's a place for conservative media, of course, and of course there should be conservative voice in mainstream media, but because we tend to work on alternative media, we work on, the internet, emerging media, the thing that I love about conservative audiences is that they are always willing to seek new sources. Mm-hmm. And I find that to be refreshing. In some ways, Fox has to compete with more because we are growing stronger than CNN sort of mainstream media does, because I just don't see the same parallel to what we are building here on the left.
They take their CNN, they set it and forget it and just use that as their source for everything, as their source of information for everything. Whereas people who tend to be right-leaning are excited to go out and explore new avenues of people to listen to.
And totally, that's my
I think, Brett, the miscalculation was that Fox historically, they've seen big names depart. Bill O'Reilly left. Train kept on going. Megyn Kelly left. Train kept on going. Lou Dobbs. A lot of people have left and nothing happened. And I think they assumed that the organization was bigger than any one individual, and they underestimated how big Tucker Carlson was.
Yeah. I mean, he was absolutely massive and people really loved him. Part of what I valued so much about him were the things I laid out earlier about the fact that he was willing to entertain and even promote ideas that other people in the mainstream weren't. What he was saying about January 6th and Ray Epps were things that I was very surprised to hear on television.
And about Ukraine.
I mean, and these are things that really lended credibility to this narrative, not just because he was saying it on television, that's huge in terms of optics, but also because he was supplying good evidence for this story. And so when he released the Jan 6 tapes on television, I thought that was a massive victory for truth and for the fight against the hegemonic narrative that the left-wing media forces the American people to stomach. And so when he left, you had a lot of conservatives saying things like, ultimately, this is really good for Tucker Carlson because he's better off without Fox. And I don't think anyone was or is doubtful that he's going to be tremendously successful at whatever he does.
He already has been.
Exactly. But what was really sad for me was that even though I was well aware of the fact that he'd be successful, there is something about the credibility that television lends to a person that makes their ideas more palatable to the American people.
Yeah, like people were talking about, because he did his interview on Tucker on Twitter with Andrew Tate, which cracked 80 to 100 million viewers, and they were trying to pass it off as this is the most watched interview of all time. The problem is when you look at that list, it's all ABC, NBC. It's a lot of 60 Minutes, Diane Sawyer. So it automatically is kind of discounted by people because they're like, what is a view on Twitter? A view is just somebody scrolling past it. So the legitimacy that being on a network slot at a specific time gives credibility in a way that's a lot easier if you're trying to share something with somebody who may not be informed on what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. It's a big platform that he no longer has. No question about it. He also went after pharmaceutical companies.
Yep.
And if you look at the commercials, not just on Fox, but everybody, Ozempic, there's this, there's that, there's this, there's that. There's all these drugs that the pharmaceuticals are pushing. They're a huge advertiser. And so he was essentially going after many of the advertisers that are on Fox. Yeah. And that took a great deal of cashews.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you have positions that are not television safe, it makes sense.
Brett, you got that? Cashews?
I got that.
Yeah. I mean, he had positions that weren't television safe. That's what we value about him. But when you're in that position, it's kind of an inevitability that you're going to get pushed off of the network, especially if they're trying to stand by their advertisers rather than ensuring that the viewers get the truth on those matters. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I think is really a testament to Tucker Carlson and the work that he did was after, when he was let go from Fox, I believe around the same week, Don Lemon was let go from CNN. And when Don Lemon was let go, everyone was speculating, is this because of the extremely ignorant comments that he made to Vivek? Is this because of him saying that women aren't in their prime past their 40s in front of those women? When Tucker got let go, was it this story? Was it that story? I mean, people were talking about important journalistic work that the establishment might not like. When Don Lemon got let go, no one was thinking, oh, that one story he told really shook up the establishment and ruffled a lot of feathers. It was petty drama that people were speculating he had to have been let go over. And that is it's not just true of Don Lemon. That's most journalists today, I would argue.
When Don Lemon was let go, the issue to me was what took him so long.
Yeah, exactly.
We all wondered
He's
that.
one of the dumbest people on television, always playing the race card, hated Donald Trump, referred to him as a racist. I could go on and on and on. But he even took a shot at me one time. He said,
What did he say?
He said I wasn't very smart.
Why did he say that about you?
Dennis Prager was on his show, and he says, my friend Larry Elder says, and Don Lemon said, well, why are you quoting Larry Elder? He's not that smart.
What?
And he said, oh, he's very, very smart. And Don Lemon says, no, just because he's on conservative radio doesn't mean he's with it.
That's what he said? Yeah, what is that even supposed to mean to me?
I have no idea what it means.
Very unsmart rhetoric.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not like he's not demonstrating his own intelligence there.
I think that's one of the things about personalities in media that I find so interesting, especially when we contrast Tucker. Obviously, I have never had Don Lemon specifically attack me, but someone who feels as though they are they are a benefit to the institution, that CNN is better because Don Lemon is there. That type of I'm going to use the word self-confidence, but I really mean his ego is toxic. And I think that really inhibits someone's performance in work. Whereas Tucker Carlson, despite the fact that he got big, really did continue to push to have truth and to see this mission and connect to his viewers. And I just, I don't see the same trajectory of Don Lemon's career.
Well,
and so they become different value assets. To Fox, Tucker was a risk in a lot of ways, but Don Lemon was just a drain on resources.
That's a very polite way of saying, Hannah Claire, that Don Lemon is dumb and Tucker Carlson is not. I was on Don Lemon's show once. I think the last time I was on, shockingly, and we were talking about racism. And I pointed out that Time and CNN some years ago had done a study of black teenagers, and they asked them whether or not race was a major problem in America, and the majority of them said yes. But then they asked the black teenagers whether racism was a big problem, a small problem, or no problem in their own daily life. 89% of the black teens said a small problem or no problem in my own daily life. In fact, more black teens and white teens said failure to take advantage of available opportunities was a bigger problem than racism. I said that to Don Lemon, and that was the last time I was on his show. Shockingly.
Yeah, why we want to kick you off for that?
Why would I quote a poll done by CNN on CNN?
Well, this
to
is
refute what he was saying on CNN.
All right, and this is
you're
so
not very
important.
smart, according to Don.
Yeah, according to him, not a very smart move. If you want to get invited back on, maybe that's what he's saying. You have to be media savvy. Yeah. Well,
proves my point. You're dumb, Larry. You're not going to be on anymore.
This is one of the things I've said repeatedly. When people talk about BLM, for example, they act as if this is an organization that speaks for black people. I don't remember any focus group going into black neighborhoods and asking them what kind of political change they'd like to see and then forming an organization around it. It sounds to me like there were people who also had black skin who claimed that they speak for every other black person and started pushing far left Marxist talking points.
Do you know what incident started BLM?
I believe it was Trayvon Martin.
Correct.
Yes.
It wasn't George Floyd. People think it was. It was Trayvon Martin.
No.
And as you know, George Zimmerman was found not guilty of shooting and killing Trayvon Martin. There were no blacks on the jury, but there was a black juror. And those jurors who spoke publicly afterwards said that race never came up. And the black juror said that he would have found him not guilty as well, and race never came up. What's interesting to me about the George Floyd riots, the 4 months we had in 2020, is that the lead prosecutor in the case was a black man. And I was a lawyer. I was a trial lawyer when I practiced law. And the most important part of a trial is your opening statement. And he took pains to say that the police in general were not on trial. The Minneapolis PD in general was not on trial. This individual named Derek Chauvin was on trial for what he did or what he didn't do. He never even implied what he did had to do with race, and Chauvin was never charged with a hate crime. Yet you had 4 months of people in the streets. Why? Because the assumption was because of what Chauvin did had to do with George Floyd's race, even though the prosecutor never even implied it.
Yeah,
What's that all about?
Well, also, I want to mention this with
Kyle
the
Rittenhouse, because
Trayvon.
at the end they were saying, this was obviously racially motivated, which
which is nonsense. But I remember with the Trayvon story, NBC actually came out and they had to apologize for this later, which was just shocking that any media outlet was willing to do that. Maybe it's because this was about 10 years ago and they wouldn't do it today. But they edited the recording of the call that Zimmerman made to the police. They asked him to describe Zimmerman, and he said he looked like he was up to no good. And then they asked him to describe what he was wearing, and he said something like, he's wearing a hoodie, it's black. And they sliced the phone call down.
Sure did.
So they said, how does he look? And he responds in the edited tape, he looks like he's up to no good. He looks black.
That's evil.
It's evil.
That's evil.
And that is why people are deluded. There's a website called policemag.com. And they asked people who are self-described as very liberal, how many unarmed black men did the police kill in 2019? half of them thought the police killed 1,000. 8% thought they killed 10,000. And then people who were self-described as liberal, 39% of them thought the police killed 1,000 unarmed black men in 2019. And 5% thought they killed 10,000. The answer was 12, according to the Washington Post database.
Yeah.
That's how deluded people are between what's really going on and what they think is going on. In fact, the police kill more unarmed whites every year than they kill unarmed blacks. I bet most people in this audience could probably not name an unarmed white person because media doesn't give a rip.
Well, and not only that, but when you actually look at that post that was published on the number of black men who were killed by the police while not being armed, and you go through the specific cases, one of them was he was attacking the police officer. Right. Okay, so, and there were others like attacking an old lady. Just because you're unarmed doesn't mean you're not a threat to somebody else's life.
Michael Brown was unarmed. His DNA was found on the officer's gun.
He reached for it. Yeah.
And there's a guy in the famous case named Amadou Diablo in New York. I think I'm mispronouncing his name. An immigrant, and he fit the description of somebody, and they had him in some sort of alley. They told him to show his hands, and he reaches for his wallet, and they shoot him. Hillary referred to the cops as murderers. They were found not guilty because the gesture was reasonably perceived as a threatening gesture. Yeah. So you were unarmed, but it doesn't mean you were not dangerous or not reasonably perceived as dangerous.
Well, there's a reason they say hands up. You are not supposed to reach for anything when when anyone has a gun pointed at you, when a police officer has a gun pointed at you, or they're telling you you're under arrest, whatever it is, they don't even have to have the gun drawn. Do not reach into your pockets. Don't reach into your glove box. This is one of the most basic things. And all the time we hear people saying, oh, well, as a black person with children, I constantly have to tell them when the cops pull you over, don't reach into your wallet, don't reach in your glove box. Everyone knows that. That's not a black or white thing. Everyone knows that.
Your parents should teach you how to properly behave at a traffic stop.
But Hillary referred to that as the talk, meaning only black people say that.
No.
Nonsense.
Yeah. No, it's completely
and it's
ridiculous.
getting people killed because it's called the George Floyd effect or the Ferguson effect. And that's the phenomenon of cops pulling back from their normal proactive policing. So the last few years, there are thousands of people who are dead or who have been injured who otherwise would not have suffered had the police have been doing their normal proactive policing. And these so-called excess casualties or deaths are the very black and brown people that people on the left purport to care about.
Yeah.
So you're getting people killed.
Because they're keeping accurate information from them.
Exactly.
And I think that's the biggest crime.
It's sad too because I'm from Minnesota, and look, the North Minneapolis police for a lot of years not a great reputation. Right. There is a strong argument to be made that changes needed to happen, that there were problems within that police force that are well documented, that go back decades and decades and decades. But what it does is it takes the focus off the actual problem and puts it on to one individual example, which when misreported or reported the way that it was, brings people and makes them extremely radicalizes people to the point where, like you said, we experienced a lot of rioting for months.
I'll give you
and
another
months.
example, Brett. We know about the subway guy, Daniel Penny, who put the chokehold on Jordan Neely. 3 weeks earlier, tell me if you knew this. 3 weeks earlier, Tulsa, Oklahoma, homeless black man walks up behind a white guy, takes out a gun, shoots him in the back of the head and kills him. Goes to another area of Tulsa, Oklahoma, finds another white guy, shoots him in the back of the head and kills him. Admits he did it because they were white.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine if the races were reversed? If this had been a white guy, homeless, popped two black guys behind the head, execution style, and killed him? We know
Cities
his name.
might have been burnt down.
We know his name. We know the name of the people who were victimized. Most people don't even know about this story. It took place 3 weeks earlier than the incident on the subway.
I had heard about the story and watched it not get picked up. What I also found was interesting with Jordan Neely was that the fact that he had a history of specifically committing assaults in subways.
Yeah.
So we acted like he was just, obviously he's troubled. There is a reasonable conversation to have around the foster care system, which he was involved in, mental health, things like that.
That's right.
But we should not deny the fact that he had established criminal history specifically in the place where this interaction with Penny happened.
Right. And Hannah Claire, real quickly, what's interesting about this is what is the evidence that Daniel Penny would have just sat there had Jordan Neely been white? Okay, white guys threatening people. It's cool. He's white. What up, bro? It's all good. Really?
Yeah.
He just would have done nothing if the guy had been white?
It's ridiculous. He was screaming that he wasn't afraid to go back to jail, that he was going to hurt people.
Right.
Hannah Claire, you made this point about examining the person's past. This is one of the things that drives me crazy. Every single time someone commits a senseless act of violence, the left bends over backwards to engage in every single facet of socioeconomic analysis to find an excuse for this person. This is because we didn't fund the public school they went to. This is because we're not building enough libraries. This is because of some form of structural racism. But when a man sees an unhinged person screaming on the subway, threatening your average person, and he does something which is totally understandable and even heroic by intervening to help people,
absolutely.
The only way we can understand that is as racism. Now, socioeconomic factors and the circumstances totally melt away, and this is a war between good and evil, and those are the only factors to consider. And of course, he was pure evil. Because
Never mind the fact that Jordan Neely had assaulted a 60-year-old woman, broken her jaw. Also, that he had been given an opportunity to go into rehab to get city services and counseling, and he left that program.
he attempted to kidnap a child.
There are all kinds of things.
It's insane.
It just doesn't make sense at all. And again, I want to have compassion. I want to understand, but I can't do that at the expense of logic or inaccurate information.
And and you pointed out something important. You're talking about compassion. You are compassionate. Saying that we should allow people to commit crimes is a false compassion, right?
True.
Mercy for the pedophile is actually cruelty against the child. Mercy towards the thief is actually cruelty against the person they might steal from. Really, mercy isn't even the right word for it. Mercy is a good thing. There's a difference between mercy and licentiousness or leniency. People have to be punished for crimes. If you don't punish them, you hurt the people around them, and you hurt them too, because they need to be held accountable.
Plus, this is the least racist majority white country in the world. Racism has never been a less important factor than American life today. This is the only majority white country that elected a black president.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, how much more do you need? The president of Harvard is a black female. We've had black CEOs, black CEO of McDonald's, black CEO of Time Warner, black CEOs of American Express. There are three biggest cities in America: New York, LA, Chicago, all have black mayors. Chicago's second consecutive black mayor, even though the city's just a third black. New York is 25% black, second black mayor. LA's 9% black. They've got a black female mayor. Forbes had a list of the most influential celebrities. 25% of them were black. We can go on and on and on. It's never been a less important factor. Acceptance for interracial marriage, all-time high. What more do you need? What more do you need?
Well, they need a couple more mansions over there at BLM, right? The people who are grifting off of this need to make more money. The politicians who are trying to sell. 500
at least fake hate crimes in the last few years because we got a supply and demand problem.
That's right. That is exactly right.
The demand for racism is exceeding the supply, so they make up stuff.
You can always tell because they never know how to draw the swastika. They draw it wrong every single time. It's always wrong.
That you know how to draw the swastika, Brett, is kind of frightening.
Yeah,
we're all concerned about you now.
I will say, like, when you mentioned earlier, you were mentioning the statistics about what they said was like, is racism a very big problem here in America? And then do they experience it in their daily lives? And you said when they say they don't experience it as much in their daily lives.
89% said little or nothing.
The reason I think that is inherently is that we live in our phones now, and you're carrying around a device that's telling you that the world is evil and that the people around you are evil. So they're not reacting to the world around them as they experience it. They're reacting to the world around them as they experience it through their phone and through data that they're reading, through stories that they're reading, through infographics, through things they're seeing on TikTok. They're not actually responding to the way they experience the world.
I mean, look at Barack Obama. He goes to the finest school in the state of Hawaii. Then he goes to Occidental, which is a very elite private school in LA for 2 years. Then he goes to Columbia, finishes up there. Then he goes to Harvard, becomes president of the Harvard Law Review. Then he goes to work for a major law firm. His kids all went to private school. And he's Malcolm X. I mean, what is that? What is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
It's offensive.
It is offensive. This is something, it's almost like kind of the rich kid syndrome, right? No one ever wants to admit that they had a good upbringing. No one ever wants to admit that their parents worked hard and that they had things handed to them. Look, I'm extremely blessed. The privilege that I had in life is that I had two parents who loved me tremendously, who stayed together, who cared a lot about me and my siblings, and that did give me a leg up. Now, here's the problem. I'm not ashamed of that, and I shouldn't be. I think everyone should have that leg up. This is why we need to do everything we can to combat fatherlessness in the incentive structure that the state is created to promote.
Anybody born in America who's born with two parents hit the lottery twice.
That's right.
A black kid who's poor with mom and dad in the house will have a better outcome than a middle-class white kid with just a mom.
Wow.
And
that doesn't surprise me, but I never heard that.
The number one issue in America is the epidemic of fatherlessness. 70% of black kids today enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Now 25% of white kids enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother. And 65 is important because that's when a guy named Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was then the Assistant Secretary of Labor, wrote a booklet for his boss called The Negro Family, A Case for National Action. At the time, 25%, as I mentioned, of black kids were born outside of wedlock, which he thought was horrific, and we needed to do something about it. Now it's almost 3 times that. And what we've done with the welfare state is incentivize women to marry the government and incentivize men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility.
That's right. Well, and there's an additional element here too. I totally agree with you on the welfare state, but the Brookings Institute released a very interesting paper where they basically said that while conservatives tend to look at the welfare state, another massively overlooked part of this was Roe v. Wade and the fact that the social expectations completely changed. Now, if a woman was pregnant, it wasn't on the man to stay with her. It was on her to choose whether or not she was going to get an abortion. And so that reshaped the way we thought about fatherlessness. If you got a woman pregnant and didn't take care of that child in any community, you were entirely detested. You destroyed your reputation. You had to get out of town. Nowadays, that's just the choice that you happen to make. The mother might have issues with it, but she could have gotten an abortion.
Right. And studies bear out that having a father in the home is the biggest factor in children's success.
No question about it. You're five times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in jail. Obama even quoted those stats once.
Yeah. And children who are raised by a single father.
I say it on the blackface of white supremacy. But Obama can say it, and he's down with the brag.
It's just crazy how many like black and Hispanic white supremacists there are. There's so much diversity in white supremacy
you would
now.
Never guess
strides.
Diversity, equity, inclusion.
The thing is, like
the white supremacy, like the KKK, I guess, is a DEI person now, ensuring that
well, that's very progressive.
Also, though, think about colleges that incentivize. Like somebody pointed out, they're like. Hard luck story beats 4.0 GPA every time at colleges. So you're incentivized even when you come from that background because that's part of affirmative action, programs and scholarships.
Right, but those stories often will be, I was raised by a single mother and that was hard for me and I overcame it, whatever else. But actually studies show that children raised in father-only homes where their mother has abandoned them outperform single mother family. Like it is the single biggest difference in the entire world. And yet what are we, you were talking about this with the Barbie movie, we are embracing anti-patriarchy,
That's
which I
right.
think is bananas.
And Black Lives Matter on their website attack the nuclear intact family.
That's right.
And by the way, Barack Obama embraced Black Lives Matter.
It's the one
His
thing.
first book was all about how he had angst because he didn't have a relationship with his biological dad, Barack Obama.
Well, and yeah, that's exactly right. So whenever people talk about patriarchy, what they're really talking about, what patriarchy is the headship of the father in the household. The idea that this is denigrated, the idea that this is slammed, the idea that this is smeared, it's obvious why, right? Marx wanted to destroy the family. These people also want to be free to pursue whatever deranged, perverted sexual appetites they have, and family gets in the way of that. But here we are.
And the co-founders of BLM are self-described trained Marxists.
Which they took off the website midway through 2020 because people kept quoting that to them and showing the old video of them where they talked about that at a meeting, right? So
well, people have lost faith in God, and so they have to end up pledging allegiance and giving their souls to things that are, of course, significantly less important than one's faith and one's values. We have a poll here from Gallup, which actually shows belief in 5 supernatural entities edges down to new lows. Well, first, I don't even like that framing, supernatural entities. They're talking about God, angels, heaven. They bleep out, censor out the word hell, and also the devil. Yes, so belief in God has edged downward. You see the trend over the past 20 years or so. It was interesting because as I was reading this article, one thing that really was depressing to me was the fact that they were listing the discrepancy between Catholics and Protestants and the number of Catholics and Protestants who believe in God. Why would it not be 100% for both groups?
You would think.
It's totally insane, but you can identify.
And we talked about this a little bit. There is a cultural element to Christianity, especially people who will say, "Oh, I was raised Protestant, but I actually do nothing about it. I don't read the Bible. I go to church when I'm made to go to church." They don't live it, but they will claim the identity. I think that can be attributed to a little bit of this.
I think it parallels the decline in people that feel patriotic and feel proud of America.
Absolutely.
If you look at the trend lines that they parallel.
And fatherlessness too, because there's a reason he is described as God the Father. There are many reasons for it, but a person's relationship with their father is going to inform their attitudes towards God very heavily. In fact, statistically, we know one of the number one predictors of a child choosing to stay with their religion or their family is whether their dad practices that faith. If the mom practices that faith, they're likely to some degree to stay in, but not nearly as likely as if their dad practices the faith. It's incredibly important. Kids learn about God by the way that their fathers act, and it's something that we don't really account for or consider.
God and how to live. I mean,
exactly.
Children learn all sorts of things through their parents, and the decisions that you make in your life and when you become a parent should be cognizant of the fact that someone is now watching you, someone is looking up to you. And I think so much of our anti-responsibility culture parallels this, right? Like, I don't want to think about God because I don't want to think about the afterlife because I don't want to have to think about the fact that my decisions have consequences.
In 30 years of being on radio, I've invited Jesse Jackson on dozens of times. He won't even respond.
Shocking.
I've invited Al Sharpton on dozens of times, won't respond. Maxine Waters won't respond. Louis Farrakhan wouldn't respond, but one of these so-called black leaders, Kwesi Mfume, at the time he was head of the NAACP, president, he was in Congress in Maryland. Now he's back in Congress in Maryland, and he did come on the show. And my first question was as follows: Mr. Mfume, as between the presence of white racism or the absence of black fathers, which poses a bigger threat to the black community? Without missing a beat, to his credit, he said the absence of black fathers.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's undeniable. And you're right, it is to his credit because the entire left-wing establishment is going to punish anyone who says something like that. But it's just so undeniably true.
Yeah. I was just wondering if I could ask, you're listing this this band of people who don't want to speak to you, presumably because you're conservative or Republican. Right. Can you tell us a little about how you got to this place politically?
You mean how I became conservative? Or,
yeah, when did you adopt the title of Republican?
My mom was a Democrat, my dad was a Republican, and they would have these very interesting disputes across the dinner table. Nobody called anybody a fascist. Nobody called anybody a Nazi. Nobody said you only care about the rich, you don't care about the poor. And so as a kid, you identify with your mom. And so I was a Democrat. In fact, the first person I voted for president was Jimmy Carter. Oh, wow. And that was because he Ford pardoned Nixon. And I thought that was inappropriate. I now think it was a smart thing to do. And so I punished him for doing that. And so I voted for Jimmy Carter. But from that point on, I voted Republican.
You punished the American people if you helped Carter get elected.
I was an independent for years. And then I decided to run against Barbara Boxer. I forget the year, but a bunch of people prevailed upon me to do that. And so I switched my affiliation from independent to Republican. And then I flew to D.C. to interview with a bunch of Republican senators to see if I can get the nomination, get the endorsement during the primary season. If they had endorsed me, I was going to run. Mm-hmm. They endorsed Carly Fiorina instead of me, so I decided not to run. And by the way, when I found out that they endorsed her, I said, why? They said 3 reasons. She's a woman. I said, I'll give you that. I'm not going to have a sex change operation to run for Senate. She has more money than you do. She did because she just resigned from Hewlett Packard. They gave her a big settlement. The third reason was she has higher name recognition than you do. I said, no, she doesn't. Maybe she does in D.C., but not in California. I had a 30% name recognition. Barbara Boxer's first 2 opponents, a guy named Bruce Hershenson and then a guy named Matt Fong at the same juncture, had a 5% name recognition. And Carly Fiorina lost by 10 points and put very little, by the way, of her own money into the campaign. Yeah. Long answer to your question, that's when I became a registered Republican, but I've always been a small L libertarian.
Well, I was going to say, if you were identified as a potential candidate to run for office as a Republican, they must have been aware that you were toying with conservative ideas. Was that something that you got a lot of pushback for? And did you resist? Did you stay an independent to resist the label of Republican?
I think so, because I always felt both parties still spend, and I still do. One of the things I'm proposing is an amendment to the Constitution to fix spending to a certain percentage of the GDP. That's great. With exceptions for war and for natural disaster. Other than that, they both spend. And part of it is because the so-called entitlements programs are on automatic pilot. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, and a few others. And if you even suggest you're going to reform them and try to run for office, you're going to lose.
Well, you know,
so the can gets kicked down the road. Even Barack Obama and Bill Clinton used the word unsustainable to describe the entitlements program. So everybody knows that they're unsustainable. You just can't politically do anything about it. You can't be the one
to axe them. Yeah.
No. And however, if you are forced to do it by law, then and only then will there be a reform. For young people like you, they're not going to be there. And so it seems to me the president, and I will do that when I become president, will use the bully pulpit to explain this to people, particularly young voters, that this is in your best interest and maybe something can happen.
And so what I just want to ask quickly, where would you fix that GDP to revenue ratio?
10%, which is half of what it is at right now.
All right,
which is going to require massive changes.
Yeah.
And I say 10% because in 1900, at all 3 levels, state, local, and federal, believe it or not, government took 9% from the American people. Now all 3 levels, government takes 32%. And in my opinion, if you put a cost to the mandates, government takes almost 50%. Yep. This is way, way, way bigger than what the Founding Fathers intended. They did not intend for there to be an income tax. They intended for the limited duties and obligations of the federal government to be paid for by duties and tariffs. They would be appalled at Obamacare. They'd be appalled at Social Security. They'd be appalled at Medicare. They'd be appalled at FEMA. They'd be appalled at the things that the federal government is doing.
Well, it's interesting you point out that the federal government takes so much of our money, and they have, and you're right. There's an interesting observation. This is referred to as Hauser's Law. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but the basic idea is that regardless of where tax rates are, regardless of how much the government tries to take, since World War II, federal revenues have always hovered around 19.5%, which just goes to show that if you impose these insanely high taxes on people, they either become less productive, and so there's less to tax, or they start hiding their money so the government can't get to it.
Rich people are not rich because they're stupid. it.
Yeah, that's right.
They hide their money or they put them in other kinds of things so that they're taxed less.
Yeah, and so, there are certain left-wing commentators who will scoff at the idea of the Laffer curve. And a more sophisticated left-wing approach is to say, okay, the Laffer curve exists, but I don't think the parabola peaks until we're at 70% in terms of our tax rate. All right, well, that's ridiculous, but at least you're acknowledging the reality that if you tax people at 0%, you'll have zero revenue. If you tax them at 100%, you'll also have zero revenue because no one's going to work. And there's some point along the middle where you maximize revenue for the government. But it's also very valuable for us to have this empirical data that shows us you don't seem to be able to get past 20% on the federal level in terms of what you're taking in. So why aren't they adjusting the way they tax us so that we can keep more of our money, since their revenue pretty much won't shift from there?
That's a great point. We were talking earlier about the ignorance between how many unarmed black men are killed versus what people think. Same thing with taxes. I was at a party a few years ago. A buddy of mine was celebrating his birthday. He's a Vietnam vet, so I assumed everybody at the party was conservative, thinking like I think. Yeah. And it's a woman, and she started complaining. Tell me about it. It's always somebody. She was complaining about how rich people didn't pay very much in taxes. I thought she was joking at first. She kept saying it over and over again. And I said, excuse me, I overheard you say rich people don't pay their taxes. I said, I'm probably one of the so-called rich if you define somebody making above $350,000 or more as in the top 1%. I said, I have my 1040 in the car. Would you like to see it? She said, no. I said, of all the federal taxes, what percentage do you think is paid by the rich? She said, what do you mean? I said, assume this pie is all the federal taxes. What slice by percentage is paid by the top 1%? She said, oh, I see what you mean. 1%. She said, maybe 2%.
Oh my gosh.
And Seamus, I kept waiting for her to ask me what the answer was. Because she saw my face. I looked appalled like you did. And she never asked. She didn't want to know. And the number is 40%.
Yeah.
While taking in 15 to 20% of the nation's income. So if anything, rich people are overtaxed, not undertaxed.
Well, I think doesn't want to hear that.
No, when you look at income tax, I think it's what the top 10% pays 90% of the income tax.
And
it's insane.
And the bottom 50% pay about 4%. They pay almost nothing.
And then once
and
you
I have
get
to say,
below
the best part of that story is that you were driving around with your tax.
Oh yeah.
Look, I'll show you.
You're like, any
I have
minute.
those seats.
Ticked off.
You're listening for these kind of complaints.
Yes.
Like, when can I bring
I'm in California. When you put in the state income tax, sales tax, property taxes, it is not uncommon for somebody with regular income as opposed to capital gains income being taxed at 60%.
Yeah.
Even Bill Maher complained about it one time.
And this is part of
why you've lost Bill Maher, then you're probably overtaxing people.
And as someone who runs a business myself, when you have to cut that money out of your own bank account rather than having your employer withhold it from you, you start seeing taxes in a little bit of a different way.
Right.
This is one of these reforms that I know there are probably implications to this that I'm not really exploring by so haphazardly suggesting we do this, but I'm often tempted to say we should make every American person pay their taxes that way. No one should have their taxes withheld by their employer. You should have to pay it in a lump sum so that you see what they're taking from you.
I heard Milton Friedman say it was a huge mistake that we have automatic withholding like that, because if people really saw what they were being charged for taxes, we would have changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's true. I think that's one of the problems some of our systems insulate people, or they keep people from the realities of what they do. I this is one of my favorite tangents of all time, but I really think that we need to breed a culture of responsibility and long-term thinking. I think there are reasons why this tax withholding it seems nice and somebody else deals with it, but ultimately you vote very differently when you're well informed. This is a theme we keep coming back to tonight. When you're talking to this woman at a dinner party and she says, I don't want to know, it's because that way she doesn't have to change her opinion. She doesn't have to evolve her worldview based on accurate information.
And being well informed brings us to the disaster that we call public education in the inner city. 13 public high schools, 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. 0. Another half a dozen where 6% can. Another half dozen where 1% can. That's half of all the public high schools in Baltimore, all located in the inner city. The kids are 1% or 0% math proficient.
It's
Chicago,
horrible.
53 schools, 0% are math proficient. If you can't, and 85% of blacks in the 8th grade, these are 13-year-old kids, can neither do math nor read at grade level, and half of them can't do basic reading, which means you cannot critically think. Yeah. And you can be manipulated by emotion.
So
it's scary.
It is
terrifying.
scary. I'll mention this. My father was a public school teacher on the south side of Chicago, and for his entire career he taught, and then towards the end of his career he became vice principal and then eventually principal. And one thing he would talk about was the fact that when they, as the high school, would get these students from their middle schools, they were so unbelievably far behind that the best they could hope to get them to do was still significantly below where they should be. It's a very sad state of affairs when you look at how broken that system is.
Teaching to the curve,
Yes.
And as a result, everybody else suffers.
That's
which
right.
is why we got to have vouchers.
Do you want?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I was about to ask, what are some solutions to this? that we should all think about?
Vouchers, but by far. There was a study done some years ago where government school teachers, which is a term I prefer rather than public school teachers, government school teachers were asked where you send your own school-age kids. Nationwide, 10% of us send our kids to private school. 6% of black families do. 49% of Philadelphia government school teachers with school-age kids put their own kids in private school.
What a shock.
Which shows you the people who know the school is the best teachers aren't putting their own kids in it. What does that tell you?
When you see how
does that tell
sausages
you?
are made, you don't want to feed them to your kid, I guess.
The CEO of McDonald's does not let his kid eat McDonald's. The people who run social media companies do not allow their kids to have smartphones.
The CEO of McDonald's does not let their kids eat at McDonald's?
Or
Are you
Pepsi.
serious?
Same with Pepsi.
Really?
Said he would
I didn't
never
know
let
that.
his kids eat drink
Wow.
Pepsi.
Yep.
But it's good for you, good enough for your kids.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
That's totally fine.
And that's one of the massive problems with this country today. We think about what is best for our own families, which is of course what we should be doing, but we don't extend that and say, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing things that would actively harm somebody else's family. Maybe I should actually care about the people around me. I should care about my country. I should care about the national project.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that there is an importance on emphasizing the nuclear family in your decisions, but the nuclear family is a building block in a larger sphere, right? So you have your family who's a part of a community, and you make choices for your family, but hopefully they positively benefit your community, and your community then benefits
Absolutely.
your state, and goes on and on and on. I think it's a mistake to assume that people aren't seeing the consequences of that. I just think that, I knew someone who, when she had her first baby, you have to immediately make a pediatrician appointment. There's all kinds of things you have to do. And so she asked the nurse in the room, who she had had a positive experience with, where do you take your kids? I want to go wherever you're taking your kids because you were kind to me. And I know you love your kids. You seem like a devoted mom, and I need help. And I think that's what the culture we need to breed: mutual assistance, by knowing that someone who makes good decisions for their own family can recommend and give you advice and guidance when you start your own family.
Hannah Claire, there was an article in The Atlantic, which is a left-wing publication a few months ago.
Yeah,
and it talked about all the different decisions that a young family makes when they're having a baby. And they said the most important decision is whether or not you're able to move into a neighborhood where there are a lot of two-parent households. Even if you move into one and you're a single-parent household, you're going to benefit by the culture. And the reverse, of course, is true too. You move into a neighborhood where there are a whole bunch of single-parent household, it's going to corrupt the culture.
Yeah.
Even just think about, like, I need somebody to babysit my child. I don't have anyone to babysit my child. If you're in a neighborhood with a lot of single parent households, that parent is at work. That kid is probably
You get a lot
at
of
daycare.
kids who are by themselves.
You're not going to have the community that you can rely upon to call on. And I think that that's part of the culture in America has shifted away from that. I feel, especially in cities, right? Everyone's bunched up close together, but there's not the same level of connection that you have if you live in an area where it's households on a block. I mean, that's how it was. I grew up in a cul-de-sac, right? We knew our neighbors. We knew all the people that lived on that street.
I didn't know what a cul-de-sac was when I grew up.
Well, it was called a court, but we call it
a cul-de-sac.
Yeah,
I grew up in a cul-de-sac.
Yes.
And you're right. You watch Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah.
You guys familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
And there's a dispute between the boys, and the parents would resolve it. The fathers would talk about it. There are no fathers.
That's right.
No one can say
and
my
this
dad can beat up your dad anymore because there's no dads around.
Well, here's another element of this. You're absolutely right. What has happened in media over the past 50 years is progressively we have portrayed fathers in a worse and worse light. So whereas in Leave It to Beaver, you had a father who was strong, he was masculine, he was intelligent, he was solving problems for his family. You now have the standard Homer Simpson character portraying fathers in television shows. Don't get me wrong. I love The Simpsons.
He's a doofus.
I think it's a hilarious show, but this is a really negative cultural shift. And I believe the reason for this is because when you want to attack an institution, you attack the leader, and the father's the head of the household.
I got a question for you guys since you bring this up. I was talking to a buddy of mine that I work with when I was doing my Epic Times TV show. And I said, have you noticed that on commercials, the doofus is always a white guy?
Oh, always.
And he said, I never noticed that. I said, look at the commercials. The smart, knowing guy is always a black guy, but the doofus is always a white guy. Look at the commercials that Snoop Dogg is doing with, what's the comedian's name?
I'm not sure.
Corona beer commercials.
I don't know.
I haven't seen those.
You guys don't watch
You're
regular.
more up on
you
pop
guys don't
culture
watch
than us, including our
regular
pop
television.
culture.
He's some
don't watch commercials, remember?
Adam Sandberg.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Andy
yeah.
Samberg.
Andy
yes,
Samberg.
yeah.
And,
Lonely Island guy.
Yeah, and so Snoop is sitting on the beach, and Samberg here, and Snoop is the all-knowing guy, and Samberg the doof. And it happens, and he went, I never noticed. So he looks at TV, comes back after a week, he said, you're right.
It's every
Well,
character.
and it's also the woman is
that-
always a genius and the man's an idiot.
Does
too.
that bother you guys? I'm just wondering.
Oh,
as a white person,
Yeah,
are you
it's
bothered by
annoying.
It
that?
bothers me a lot. There was
No, because I'm not racist.
Yeah.
No, it bothers me
Yeah, of
because I also
course.
feel like we wouldn't like it for anyone else, right? I don't like it for white people, just like I wouldn't want it for anyone else. There was a crime show, and I wish I could remember the name. Maybe it's 24. And my brother, we were all home. It was around Christmas time. I was in college. He was like, "You guys gotta watch the show. It'll be so fun. We'll all watch it while we wrap presents or do whatever." And after the first two, I was like, "Hey, I can play this game with you. I bet the villain is a white man. I bet the villain is. I bet the guy committing the crime is a white man.
Yes.
I bet it's a white man." And that is true all over the place. And the thing
Every
is,
time.
like, I understand that especially with crime shows, there is maybe a discomfort in talking about race. It's not that we should harp on anything specifically, but when you see the same person being made the villain all the time, that's disingenuous too.
Well, the truth is that 60% of the robberies, the homicides, and the shootings are done by black people in America. The guy that does that show, Cops, he said, "I undershow black crime because I don't want to push the stereotype." And he overshows white crime. There was also a study done some years ago that looked at the number of people in late night television who were doctors and lawyers, and the numbers of blacks were overrepresented, and the number of criminals were underrepresented.
Yeah. Oh, well, they always want to sort of go against the grain with the stereotypes. And, you made this point about white people being overrepresented in these television shows when they portray crime. On the one hand, you can imagine them saying, "Yes, I want to defy this stereotype. Yes, I want to show fewer black criminals." But then it comes at the expense of white people. Now you're making it seem as if white people are more criminal than the statistics show that they are. And in terms of this question of commercials showing white men as idiots and then black men or black women as brilliant and knowing everything, that certainly annoys me. It's something that you just get to a point where you don't even think about it because it's so common. What bothers me even more than that are the commercials, and that does bother me a lot, but what bothers me even more are the commercials where the father's an idiot and the mother's a genius, because now you're actually subverting the family unit itself. You are denigrating the relationship between men and women. I think when you create racial struggles, that's a serious problem. I hate when people in power do that, but there is no greater modern attack than the attack on the family.
Mm-hmm. I think the family structure is really integral to everything that we do. And in some ways, some things we're talking about remind me of the statistic, and I wish I could remember who put it out right now, but that there is a slight trend towards becoming more religious among Gen Z. That they are, it's not that they are dominantly religious, but they are just starting to go back to church. They are starting to embrace religion way. And again, especially since we led off with this idea that fewer people believe in God, even people who claim to be Protestants or Catholics.
Yeah.
It is interesting that as we watch the family structure for everybody get destroyed, there is a return to search for guidance, for fundamental meaning, for core values. I think that's one of the things that I'm actually hopeful about in this country. I think there is a desire to find a common value and reestablish who we are, even when we are different, what we cherish, and what we as neighbors know we can expect from our neighbors.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of some of the issues that we see with respect to the attack on the family, this idea that men are idiots, the idea that we're a horribly sexist country, I want to highlight a story from a part of the world where women actually are genuinely treated like garbage, and the left almost never seems to do anything to try to stand up for them. Beauty salon ban in Afghanistan is a blow to women's financial freedom. So this is basically a story about how in Afghanistan, now that the Taliban are in charge, they have officially banned beauty salons for women. They're shutting down businesses that these women have spent their lives building. We have a story of a 34-year-old mother of two who's not going to have her business anymore. It really is a sad story. I think as, an evil pro-man, pro-patriarchy person who thinks that anything that's bad for women is bad for men and anything that's bad for men is bad for women, I got to say, I hold very strongly to traditional values. I don't think there's anything against traditional values or traditional sensibilities of wanting women to be able to go to beauty salons. Something like this is just so horrible and senseless. But of course, the only time the left really wants to talk about the condition of women living under theocratic Islamic regimes is when they want to compare themselves to someone because politics in America didn't go their way.
They can't even go to school.
Yeah.
Where's the squad? Where's the Ilan Omar?
Yep.
Where's AOC?
Nowhere to be seen.
Where's
Any
Rashida Tlaib?
conversation about this today. This is
Ayanna Pressley, where are they?
They're nowhere. And it's because there's no consistency in their logic, right? I mean, so we're just point out in this article that without these beauty salons, which are women only anyways, because of the culture and the theocratic role in Afghanistan, there are no places where women can publicly assemble without a male chaperone. Like, they can be in their homes and that's it. And women in America believe they are oppressed. I mean, I just find it deeply ironic and in some ways insensitive, right? The next time they're saying, we're with her, I want to ask you, who is her? That sounds the worst. This is relativism. Terrible grammar, but
this is relativism because in a lot of ways, what it is you're told here in America, because we focus so much on ideological bounds that are on race, sexuality, and gender, is that stay in your lane. You can't comment on what's going on there because you inherently can't understand their culture. And a lot of the people that believe that haven't traveled the world, they haven't been outside the US, they have no frame of reference outside of that. So you're just, instead of having the uncomfortable conversation that you might want to criticize something about somebody who might not look like you or might not be from the same place as you, the idea is to just push the can down the road and ignore it, pretend like it's not happening.
And Hannah Claire, this whole business about women in America being oppressed is laughable.
Nonsense.
Every year that Obama was in office,
I'm anti all of this narrative.
He would come out and talk about how women make X number of cents on the dollar compared to men.
It's a lie.
If that were true, you would fire all your men, hire women, and pocket the difference. There are more women now in college than men. The numbers of women entering medical school and law school equal the number of men.
Graduation stats too, right?
Yeah, graduation stats. Women live longer. I mean, 90% of the people behind bars are men. I mean, where are they oppressed?
This is the only instance in history that I'm familiar with of an oppressed class being more likely to win custody battles, being more likely to receive more lenient sentences for the same crimes, more likely to vote, more likely to receive a higher education, more likely to be considered for elite programs, such as being admitted into a STEM field based on their application. It's really, a difficult kind of oppression.
If that's oppression, peel me off some of that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's what the women I think that's what the women in Afghanistan would say. They would say, we want that oppression. We want the Western American oppression. Thank you.
Well, even so, right, what we have to consider is because of the sexual revolution and modern feminism, and basically the way I've described feminism in the past is it's essentially, especially in the West, a PR campaign for the sexual revolution to try to get women to co-sign their own debasement and debasing. What we've done is we've reduced women to objects in a different way, where now all you exist to do is be sexually appealing to men. And once you've done that, and a human person is just a thing, and their value is merely a product of what they can give you, and a woman is just a sexual object, well, once a man, through surgical intervention, can emulate the secondary sex characteristics of womanhood that you find appealing, now he can be a woman too. I mean, we lose everything.
And Seamus, I think it's also driven by power and by politics. If the left convinces women that they are oppressed, it's the same thing as convincing blacks that they're still subject, second-class citizens.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. We are the party wearing the white hat in social justice for women and for minorities, and these guys over here, these dastardly Republicans, they wear the black hat.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
The meme, it says Republicans are racist. Republicans, if they got to pick the Supreme Court, and it's just all Clarence Thomas. It's just a bunch of Clarence Thomases. It's also like for this topic, I think it's a lot to do with when you divide the men and women that way, when you make it the woman an object, you are now inherently stopping the family from forming, right?
That's right.
So
That's right.
It's just Marxism. It just ends up dividing the family further.
It makes us enemies, right? Like, I don't want to live in a world where I don't believe I can live a happy life alongside men, hopefully with a man when I'm married. You know what I mean? Like, I want to believe that we are meant to be complementary and to build each other up through our unique strengths. I don't think that is the culture that progressive left tells us. And I think that's inherently destructive, right? So not only are we destroying the family by separating kids from the parents, but we are separating men from women, saying you guys are actually enemies, right? Especially if you're a man. You are the problem and you should hate yourself.
Thus Benny Thompson, who is the chair of the so-called January 6th Insurrection Committee, can publicly refer to Clarence Thomas as an Uncle Tom.
It's unbelievable.
And nothing
it's
happened.
Unbelievable. You know, it's so disgusting, this rhetoric that you hear. When people try to pile on somebody because they have the wrong opinion, they belong to some kind of minority group, as happens to you and happens to basically anyone else who speaks out against the left from the vantage point of someone in a group that they, quote unquote, represent. They end up being tarred and feathered. And what's so particularly heinous about it is, you know, if somebody tells you as a member of the out group that they don't like you. So like if a white person says something bad to a black person or a black person says something bad to a white person, that's bad. But at the very least, there hasn't been this narrative created that like your own in-group is rejecting you, your own family, your own friends, people in your community are rejecting you. To tell someone like you actually don't fit in with the category that you're a part of is a far worse way of slurring
You've been
someone.
banished from the village. We were talking about Thomas Sowell earlier.
Oh, he's incredible.
There's a magazine called Ebony Magazine. It comes out once a month. It's not nearly got the clout it used to have, but virtually every black family had it on the coffee table. We did for decades. And every year they'd have a feature called the 100 Most Influential Black Americans. And every year, absent from that list, Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, and even Clarence Thomas.
How is that possible?
Thomas Sowell's written about 40 books. David Mamet, the playwright, referred to Thomas Sowell as America's greatest contemporary philosopher. Walter Williams is the first, to my knowledge, only chair of an economics department of a non-historically black college, written a number of books. Both Thomas Sowell and he have had hundreds of outlets in their syndicated column, and most black people don't know who the hell they are because they've been banished from the village.
Can I ask, how did your Republican father respond to this? Did he point this out to you? Was this a conversation you had at home?
No, and this is just something that I observed. My Republican father said this about the Democrats. Democrats want to give you something for nothing. When you try and get something for nothing, you almost always end up getting nothing for something. One of his favorite statements. Speaking of which, in order for me to qualify for that next debate, next month in August 23rd is the debate. I need to have donations from 40,000 individuals. You can donate as little as $1. Just go to my website, elderforpresident.com or larryelder.com. $1. This vast audience, $1. Even if you want somebody else to talk about the kinds of things we're talking about, the epidemic of fatherlessness, the lie that America is systemically racist, the need for an amendment to fix spending to a certain percentage of the GDP, school choice. I even have a proposed legislation to get rid of these soft on crime George Soros-backed DAs.
That's great.
And that's on my website, larryelder.com. So even if you want somebody else to put those issues front and center, have me up there, hold my beer.
So just $1, and
just $1.
They only have to donate $1. That's going to help you get on stage.
40,000 individual donations.
What kind of debate do you want, guys? We want an interesting debate?
Yeah. You want the great Eldersky up there or what? The black face of white supremacy in the flesh?
I sent it
mid-season form.
I sent that article to somebody because there's a lot of people that I still have a lot of friends that are very liberal. I still consider myself fairly liberal on a lot of issues, but I have a lot of friends who just don't know that a lot of this stuff is going. And it took an article about the black face of white supremacy to actually wake somebody up to the absolute ridiculousness of the narrative.
And Brett, that was a headline. It was a headline.
The
Headline was Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy. Subheadline, you've been warned.
Yes.
Did you frame it?
And by the way, the woman that wrote it, her initials are Erica D. Smith. Oops. And I invited her on my radio show when the race was over because I had 2 months left in my contract, and she wouldn't come on.
Oh, what a
so
shock.
funny
Well,
to
she
think
can't platform a white supremacist, right?
I have to ask, do you have this framed on your wall?
No, but I will.
Yeah, you should.
Good idea.
So
I worked very hard for that title.
Yeah.
Anna Claire.
I actually want to say, okay, so when we're talking about like the power, like I talk a lot about the power of the media, and the most powerful thing they can do is not talk about something.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I'm talking. We're talking Thomas Sowell, we're talking about the fact that you're saying that almost all these black Americans don't know that Thomas Sowell exists. That's because he's not revered. He's not actually put into the public spotlight by anyone that they would actually watch media from. And all they would have to do is highlight him, highlight his work, but they don't because he doesn't co-sign the narrative.
This is a story I don't believe I've ever mentioned publicly. You remind me of it. I had a book, New York Times bestseller book called The 10 Things You Can't Say in America. First chapter was blacks are more racist than white. Second chapter is white condescension is as bad as black racism. And then another chapter about the war on drugs and about the war on guns. And
That first one was a Chris Rock bit.
Well,
back in
because
the
he said,
90s.
but it's because they hate black people
yes,
too.
That was
his
a Chris
joke.
Rock bit.
So
in the 90s.
I have a friend who Jesse Jackson does not know is my friend, and my friend used to work for Operation Rainbow Push in Chicago. And he said Jesse Jackson's office had a bunch of books, bookcase behind his desk, but the books on his table are the ones he was really reading. And there was a copy of my book on his table, and I hit Jesse Jackson often in my book. He told me there was a conference call with a bunch of so-called black leaders, and they said, what are we going to do about this mofo named Larry Elder? And he said they all agreed the smartest strategy was to simply ignore me.
Exactly.
And that's what they've done. And I told you all these years I've tried to get these guys to come on. They won't come on. They simply have ignored me. They won't even mention my name.
Yep.
And they made a
scariest part.
group decision. Like, just how
Don't
creepy
talk
and
about
weird.
Group chat before group
It's
chat.
so
Seriously.
creepy. Firstly, just to touch on the fact that Thomas Sowell wasn't mentioned, it's not just like Thomas Sowell is some intellectual who happened to be black. Like, he is one of the best political thinkers today. He's brilliant.
He is.
Anyone who's read his work, and he speaks so clearly too. He's not all over the place. He doesn't have trouble finding his thoughts. He just puts everything out there in a perfectly like concise and reasonable way. And everything he's written that I've read has been fantastic. But of course he's ignored because he's coming to conclusions which are very clearly true on a number of things. I don't agree with him on everything, but even when I disagree with him, he makes a remarkable case. It's thoughtful.
Maxine Waters, Gloria Allred used to be on my same radio station, and Gloria and I are friends, even though I disagree with everything she says and vice versa. But we're friends. But she would always have Maxine Waters on. And one time I said, Gloria, the next time you have Maxine Waters on, would you ask her why she won't come on Larry Elder's show? She said, sure, I'll ask her.
Yeah.
So Gloria's talking to her and then says, Maxine, my friend Larry Elder, my colleague here at KBC Radio, wants to know why you won't come on his radio show. Is there some reason why? She goes, well, Gloria, Larry Elder, he's an entertainer, and I don't go on shows of entertainer. You're not an entertainer, Gloria. You are a serious journalist, and Larry Elder's an entertainer. So I'm not going on his show. Gloria Allred is a serious journalist? Okay. Okay. Fair enough. It's all good.
Proving you really can claim. A couple of weeks ago, Seamus claimed it's by being
That's right.
a
I decided I'm a journalist.
He just announced he was a journalist. And my favorite thing is
I identify as a journalist.
Yeah.
It's not just that I identify. Here's what I realized watching media, watching so many journalists today. What the vast majority of people who call themselves journalists do is they just read articles and give you your opinion on them, which I do almost every day
all
when
the
I'm
time,
podcasting.
even when we don't ask you
So
to.
I am a journalist.
At least you're honest about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, I think I said that.
You don't purport to be objective. A journalist purports to be objective. They're not.
Yeah. And I think that's so wrong. I mean,
I have an objective.
You have an objective like a lot of journalists today, which is actually not what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be giving you the facts. And as we've said a couple times tonight, the need for accurate information and the need for critical thinking is so important. How can you be an active and healthy citizen without those things? But I will say, my favorite part about this was Seamus declared himself a journalist here live on air.
That's right.
Heterosexual journalist?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, wow.
I know there aren't many.
There aren't a lot. And then put it in his Twitter bio, and then later told me he did an interview in which the person then was like reading his Twitter bio and being like,
I think she was in on the joke.
Okay,
but
I don't know. But she was like, joining us tonight is journalist and cartoonist Seamus Coffey.
So I'm officially a journalist.
So
she was in on it, but I'm
media
recognized on
outlets
television.
outside of this. I just think that is so funny because really, like, what makes you a journalist? I thought it was being accurate and trying to be fair in your reporting, but perhaps I am wrong.
Exactly.
Actually,
it's one of these words that has no meaning anymore. But I'm a journalist, so please respect
when me and you went to March for Life and we did,
I actually did do journalism.
I said, I am now an on the ground journalist.
That's right.
We're journalists, dude.
We're both journalists
Yeah,
at this point.
now we
Wow.
are.
That's remarkable.
It's interesting how one becomes a journalist. George Stephanopoulos used to work for Bill Clinton. He was his communications director.
Yeah.
And ABC News hires him, and they say he's not going to do any political stuff. And then he started doing political stuff, and now he's evolved. He's now their chief news anchor. How did that happen? How does somebody who's a partisan for Bill Clinton wanted big health care, big taxes, all the stuff that the left wants? Now all of a sudden he's evolved to be a chief news anchor of ABC News.
Well, there was a really great quote. Chomsky's not my favorite in the world, but he had this really great moment on television decades ago where he was talking to a reporter. They were interviewing him about his book, and they said to him, he was basically explaining that media outlets will only forward certain people who have a specific set of values that line up with the networks, and the journalist becomes a little bit indignant, and they said, "Are you accusing me of not being sincere in my values?" And Chomsky says, "No, I believe you are sincere. What I'm telling you is you wouldn't have this job if you weren't. You wouldn't have this job if you didn't have those values, right? If you toe the right line, you're way more likely to rise to the top." This is what we were saying earlier. I mean, if you're a right-wing person who works at a left-wing outlet, you're going to keep your head down. And I got to be honest with people. You might want to say, I can be conservative at one of these organizations and keep my head down. You either live what you believe or you believe what you live. Yep. At some point, you're going to be assimilated. Right? You are who they say you are a combination of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Got to be careful. Got to be out about your values. There's there really aren't that many wise things that John Lennon said, but there is one wise thing he did say. He said, always tell the truth. You won't always make friends, but you will make the right ones. I think that's completely spot on. And this is what conservatives have to be more open doing.
So you didn't agree with Imagine There's No Property?
I know. Imagine There's No. Believe it or not, when a rich guy said Imagine There's No Property,
it bothers me so much that song is replacing Old Lang Syne as the New Year's Eve anthem. I think, yeah, if you listen to it, it's the first thing they play after the Times Square ball drop. But it didn't used to be like that. They used to play it before, whatever. Now, instead of playing Old Lang Syne, they play Imagine. That's creepy.
That's what caused John Hinckley to shoot Ronald Reagan.
Was that it?
Yeah.
Imagine?
Yeah.
Oh
now
my
it's
God.
because Gal Gadot did that video where she sang it on air during
I'm sorry,
COVID.
that was Mark David Chapman, right? Yeah, that's the one.
Possibly,
Mark,
yeah,
Mark
I
David
don't-
Chapman who shot Lennon. He thought Lennon was a hypocrite because of his wealth, but had a song called Imagine. There's no.
Well,
No religion, no property.
the thing is, yeah, John Lennon could have easily imagined no possessions if he gave his away, but none of these socialists do. It's remarkable.
That was that's a perfect example of great Hollywood propaganda, right? To the average person, it's just a person that likes it. It's just a song. But if you look deeper into the meaning, you understand that these motives, these objectives, especially in Hollywood, in music and entertainment, go long past what we're experiencing now. This is not a new thing. These values have been part of these industries for decades upon decades.
And this is how we ring in the new year in America. Like everyone should freak out about this. I forget to make this claim
George
every
Harrison
year.
have a song called Taxman where you taxes?
I think so.
I'm pretty sure he
yes,
did. Yeah.
I think he did. Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah.
Well, we got another story here queued up. The DOJ is going to sue Texas over Governor Abbott's floating wall and razor wire along the Rio Grande. The Justice Department notified Texas that it plans to file a lawsuit over the latest tactic in Operation Lone Star, Governor Greg Abbott's controversial border security initiative, a legal challenge welcomed by Abbott. TPR confirmed on Friday that the Justice Department sent a letter to Abbott's office outlining that Abbott's floating border barrier in the Rio Grande violates federal law, raises humanitarian concerns, and is a threat to public safety and the environment. Okay, so
They don't mention the fentanyl coming in from.
yeah, exactly. They don't mention
left
the
that out.
tens of thousands of children left unaccounted for at the border. Who I mean, when you want to talk
You
about a
only have so much
humanitarian
space when you put out
crisis,
a press release. Only so much room.
there's always
You
so much
can't get
to talk
everything.
about.
Can't get everything in, Seamus.
Well, and I'd like to ask you this because you do know the law. Not to put you on the spot. If you don't know the specifics of this, that's fine. But I'm curious if you think there's really a case here.
I don't. One of the limited duties of government is to deal with immigration. Federal government is not doing that. If anybody should be suing anybody, Texas ought to be suing the DOJ.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. That's why we just have to ship more busloads up to these blue states, and then maybe they'll
And
sue the DOJ.
you heard what the mayor of New York just now said. We've had
too many.
No,
That's right. They said no more.
We're no longer a sanctuary city.
And then I said, imagine no borders.
Yeah.
I said, imagine no countries. Why don't you let them in?
No religion too.
This is one of my favorite facts of American politics that has become far more clear over the past few years. But when you place left-wing people in the circumstances that conservatives have been in for decades, they magically have this epiphany and begin to develop conservative perspectives. Part of what was so strategically brilliant about these governors in border states shipping these migrants off to blue states is they forced them to make our arguments. There's too many people. We can't support everyone who wants to enter this country. We don't have the resources to take care of them. Yeah. Okay, if you in New York City don't have the resources to take care of these people, what about a poor border town in Texas? Are you out of your mind? Yeah.
You know, there was a study done by the Civil Rights Commission some years ago, and the group most hurt by illegal aliens are Black and brown people living in the inner city, those with high school or less education, because virtually all of the illegal aliens have very little education. There are about 1 million fewer blacks who are working because of the presence of illegal alien labor. And the presence of illegal alien labor puts downward pressure to the tune of almost $2,000 per year on the salaries of people living in the inner city. Yeah. So once again, the people who are most likely to vote Democrat, the ones to the left, claim that they care about black and brown people, are the ones most hurt.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy to me that the DOJ is upset because Greg Abbott says, hey, we're going to put up a barrier here because you're not supposed to enter illegally. And by the way, swimming across the Rio Grande is incredibly dangerous. So we should not be incentivizing it as a way for people to enter this country illegally anyways. But that doesn't matter, right? It's a humanitarian crisis that Greg Abbott is standing in the way of floods of illegal immigrations, which apparently Democratic parties benefit from. And I think you're totally right to bring up the fact that they continuously fail to advertise the cost and who is truly impacted by this. I have said over and over again that not only are illegal immigrants themselves, especially people who are trafficked across the border, abused and hurt in the process, but also every community, every person affected by this pays a price that when we say, but it's just mean, you can't put a wall there, you can't put floating buoys in the water.
And Democrats used to agree with you. I put on my my website a montage I did some years ago of Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Dianne Feinstein, Chuck Schumer, all talking about the damage done by unfettered illegal immigration. Harry Reid even used the word illegal alien. And
It was a border
Doesn't he know?
fence back.
and
Wait, hold on.
they all used to say this, and then they did a 180 when they realized that the votes were among Hispanics, and they figured that at some point, by letting a bunch of illegal aliens in, there'd be enough pressure to put on to make them residents and then citizens, and then they would vote Democrat. If legal aliens turned residents, turned voters, would vote Republican, we would not be having this conversation.
Well, and not only that, but when they go to places that tend to vote blue, they artificially inflate representation there. The pollsters say there are more people there so that they have to, increase
But
their
we
seats. But I also want to mention this horrible, horrible term you used, illegal alien. Don't you know that the preferred term is friend we haven't made yet?
But what you said is true, because they point that out about Cuban immigrants and people who come over from Cuba who they know have a tendency not to vote in the same way because they came from a socialist country, and so they don't play to that demographic the same way they do those at the Texas border.
Well, wasn't there, I might be misremembering, but there was this wet foot, dry foot policy that actually made it more difficult for people who entered the nation on rafts, basically, people who came from Cuba to enter. That's kind of interesting.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's a complete bias there. And what I find just totally disturbing is, first off, we have to acknowledge that Greg Abbott responds with, Texas has the sovereignty to enforce border security.
Yeah.
And I have to, you can criticize Greg Abbott for a lot of things, but I really like that he has made this a priority for his administration. I like that he is willing to make bold choices. Again, with the busing, everyone can accuse him of theatrics. I think it's good. I think everyone should be aware of what's going on. One of the strangest things that's happened to me since I began working in conservative media is I think Instagram figured it out, even though my Instagram is very, just personal and not political at all. It started sending me videos that some of the border chiefs take and post on their social media platforms, and the just obvious traffic that goes through that area, the obvious destruction that comes through is something that I wish more people talked about. I didn't seek that out. Instagram has identified me as a conservative. They have figured it out. But it is interesting to me that you won't see that reality portrayed. The obvious case of this is with the group of Haitian migrants who were under the bridge and trying to cross, and Alexander Mayorkas reprimanded the Border Patrol officers who were on horseback, saying they whipped them. They did this.
And they didn't.
And they didn't. They got proof. The photographer testified against
it.
And Mayorkas is still in office, letting our border policy continue, and also not standing by the agents who are doing their best given the limited resources that they have, considering the federal government consistently undermines states that are trying to be proactive, like Texas.
And the difference between Democrats that I assembled in that montage who were complaining about legal immigration 20 years ago and now, the average illegal immigrant coming from the southern border was a Mexican on foot coming across the border. Now, 100% of them pretty much are paying cartels.
Yeah, well, and not only that,
the whole border has been taken over by the cartels.
The majority of people who are being trafficked across the border are not Mexican. I was having a conversation with Jenny Terra about this, who's a reporter and journalist, an actual one, who's gone down to the border several times. What she told me is that this is her. She said she has not spoken to a single Mexican the entire time she's been down there. Now, I understand that that's anecdotal. That's the experience of one journalist. But statistically, the majority of them are not from Mexico.
No, I was going to point out our own show. I'm going to cite ourselves, citing the Los Angeles Times. When the fourth bus of migrants arrived in LA this week from Texas, the majority were from Venezuela. This is not fair to anyone.
Which is weird because socialism's great.
I thought we loved socialism.
Awful.
No one can explain it. Well, they're here to evangelize about socialism.
Did they listen to the Imagine song over there?
They heard it.
Yeah.
I just think that immigration is one of these issues that I'm so glad that more people are talking about, because again, it's the fact that the DOJ looks at Texas putting up a floating buoy wall, the kind that you would see like if you were swimming at a lake and they're saying don't go too far. They're
super racist.
That they are trying to deter people from illegally entering the country, which, by the way, they are risking their lives. They're being put into horrible situations while doing. The humanitarian crisis is Texas trying to stop this, and not the idea that anyone is willing to take children and do this, take this journey is crazy to me.
When Biden got elected, ABC's Martha Raddatz interviewed this guy who had just come across the border. And she said to him, would you have tried this if President Trump had gotten reelected? He said, no.
Of course not. Of course
And
not.
she was shocked.
Yeah.
She said, really? She said, yes, Biden has given us permiso. She was shocked. The guy, who's not going to try this? Are you kidding?
Yeah,
No,
are you?
one
Of
of-
course not.
one of the
people
statistics-
respond to incentives. People,
right. Hello?
when the laws are being enforced, people are less likely to break them. Isn't that wild?
One of the statistics that Republicans quote a lot, especially when Andy Biggs entered the motion to impeach Mayorkas a little bit earlier this year. One of the statistics comes up is the number of people who are on the FBI's most wanted list who are apprehended at the border. And they're saying there are more people apprehended at the border on the FBI most wanted list under Biden. And that sounds a little weird, like they're doing a better job of catching them. No, it's because under Trump, they didn't come near the border.
That's right.
There's
way more.
This is
way more.
bizarre.
They do things like
And
this.
those are the ones they caught.
Those are the ones they caught.
They also do things where they'll say like, oh, Barack Obama actually stopped more people from crossing the border than Bush did. That's not true. They just redefined what it meant to stop somebody at the border under the Obama administration.
Sure, and they had what was it, Title 42, where there were all sorts of issues with related to COVID that we ended up terminating because the Biden administration took it away and then had to put it back. I mean, I think the immigration issue is just profound. It really affects our country. I was wondering if you want to talk a little bit more about your stance
Yeah, I was
as a
gonna ask
potential
you.
president. Are you looking to restrict any illegal immigration?
I would put back the Trump policies that gave us the most secure border we've ever had. The stay in Mexico policy. I would stop catch and release. I would apprehend and put in confinement the people who are crossing the border illegally, because that's the only way you can deport them. Once you put them in the interior, they're going to stay forever.
Yeah.
But yeah, we need temporary workers if they're truly temporary, and there are some high-skilled workers that we need, but we should determine the number, the amount, and how long they stay.
So can I ask you something just related, not necessarily to illegal immigration, but your own policies? What would be your administration's priority? What's the first thing that you would do if you were elected?
First thing I would do is to stop this war on oil and gas, allow drilling on federal properties, and I would finish the wall. And again, reverse the anti-Trump policies that Biden has implemented. Those are the first couple of things I would do.
Yeah, you don't want to keep the shipping containers that they have in Arizona. Actually, they made Doug Ducey take them down, right? These gaps in the walls
Oh
that
my
he
goodness.
creatively
That's
fixed.
How did the catch and release policies affect the migrants that were brought in and then bused to other states, bused to blue states?
Nothing. I mean, once you're here, there's no way to get you out unless you're willing to go door to door and drag people out. And of course, the media images will be such that the NAACP, I mean,
But that's
ACLU will sue
What do you mean? They might-
once they are here.
A
they're
big
here.
part
They're
of
going to
the-
go
Yeah,
to
I
their
think you're
court
probably
dates
right
assigned.
about that.
They're going to go to their court
They have
dates
a court-
assigned
they-
6
they-
years
they-
from now.
They have a court date, and you're supposed to show up.
Yeah.
And if you don't, nothing happens.
That's wild. Well, and that's the thing. I tend to agree with you. People will say we can't do deportations. They're so horrible. I agree. It's an ugly thing. That's why we need a very strong border so that we can minimize the number of deportations necessary.
Would you agree? Do you agree with ending birthright citizenship because it incentivizes legal
I don't
immigration?
believe that the 14th Amendment ever really conferred birthright citizenship. It's the way the Supreme Court has interpreted it, or the way we think the Supreme Court has interpreted it. But the drafter of that wanted to make sure that blacks, newly freed blacks, were treated equally. It was not designed to say, if you come here illegally, drop a kid, that kid is an American citizen. It was not designed for that at all.
Yeah. I think these are all interesting reforms. I wonder if you would want to expand a little more on potentially capping legal immigration. You were mentioning that skilled workers, but maybe...
Right. I don't have a number in mind, but the point is there are workers who have skills that we don't have, science, technology, engineering, math, kinds of people. And I have no problem with having a certain number of H-1B visas, provided they're temporary. And there's certain fields, agriculture, where there's work that... people will do at prices that we're unwilling to pay, and it's seasonal. We should be able to do that and make sure that people go back.
Yeah, that's interesting. I find H-1B visas such an interesting area because I've talked to a lot of young Democrats actually who talk about brain drain in the States.
Right.
And I feel like we have a responsibility to acknowledge that when we incentivize, another country's best and brightest away and don't encourage them to return, we are actually doing that country a disservice.
Well, our job is to do America a service.
That's true.
Not to worry about other countries. I'm an America first guy. But we would not need to import these kinds of people if we were doing a better job K through 12.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's absolutely correct. People will talk often about the fact that we're effectively importing an underclass. We're bringing people in who have no skills to have them do jobs that Americans aren't unwilling to do, but would do if they paid a more decent wage. And what people don't want to acknowledge is that it's also the case that when you're importing people with H-1Bs, I think sometimes that can be good. But what we should want is for our country to produce citizens who are capable of doing those jobs.
Right. And we shouldn't use H-1B visas as a means to get rid of people who are doing the jobs just to pay the workers coming in less money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
That's exploitation.
So, where are your stances on some of the other hot button issues right now? How do you feel? I think I can probably make some guesses. I know you're more conservative, but when it comes to like the LGBTQ lobby or your stance on abortion or a federal abortion ban, where would you put yourself?
Well, on abortion, I am pro-life, but it's an issue that should be determined by the states the way it was until 1973 when the Supreme Court took up Roe v. Wade. Every state will determine its own path. I think our side falls down when we don't put the other side on the spot and ask them, at what point do you believe a pregnancy has gone so far that to terminate it would become murder? I tried to get Gavin Newsom to answer that question. Nobody would answer it. I was called an extremist. And Bernie Sanders, however, in one of the debates did say it's up to a woman to choose. Really.
It's insanity.
A moment before birth. So that guy who's behind bars in Philadelphia, Dr. Kermit Gosnell, should be free because remember that guy that was prosecuted for performing late-term abortions? I guess he's been persecuted. He's a political prisoner. He should be let go. The left is never put to task on giving us a definition at what point do they feel pregnancy has gone so far.
Yeah,
I also think though, Seamus, that the pro-life people have not only talked the talk, they've walked the walk. There are thousands of pregnancy centers all over the country with resources for education and for job training. And there are probably 35 couples for every one baby willing to adopt. So the resources are there. Women have other choices, and we should make it clear to them that they do have another choice other than to have an abortion.
You're absolutely correct that there are more couples on the waiting list to adopt than there are unplanned pregnancies in the U.S. each year. When you look at the statistics on women who have abortion, they often say it's because they didn't think there was any other option or anyone willing to help them. Again, that's not an excuse, but it just goes to show that if we had these resources for them, if we let them know that life was an option, then they'd be willing to choose it. I will disagree with you on one thing. I do believe in a federal abortion ban. I think we have to protect life in all cases, in all states. I think that
to me, it's hypocritical for me to years say that Roe v. Wade never should have been taken up, that the Supreme Court never should have found invalid every single abortion law of all the other states to make this a federal issue. And then to say, on the other hand, Roe v. Wade is overturned, now let's have a federal bill. Ronald Reagan was at least principally consistent when he said that he was going to push for an amendment to ban abortion. That would be something that would be consistent legally. He didn't do it, but he said he would do that.
Yeah, that's something I would like. So my position is not that Roe v. Wade was necessarily bad because it overturned every state's laws. I do think that is a negative about it, but primarily because it allowed for unborn children to be killed in the United States.
Well, they already were. In New York,
in certain states,
in New York,
yes,
California.
Absolutely.
In fact, where the majority of women lived, there was pretty much abortion on demand, even before Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, no, that's correct. That's correct. And I would still see that as an evil, but...
I love that you brought up the pregnancy centers, if I can just interject here. A couple of weeks ago, I read an article about how Yelp, in particular, this is in the wake of Roe, was specifically flagging pregnancy centers. So centers that offer, like you're mentioning, healthcare services, they don't offer abortion. They might talk to you about adoption as an option. They might talk to you about job training, other kinds of support. Yelp was in particular trying to warn people that this is not what you're looking for, and they were trying to make sure that they could distinguish between them. And I find that to be somewhat sad, right? I feel as though we should always encourage women to know that there are other options. I personally feel like there's a lot to be said for foster care reform in this country. But like you're saying, it's not that there are spaces in homes where people are willing to foster. It's that there are couples willing to adopt.
Absolutely.
Are there changes that could be made to the adoption process?
Well, adoption is hard because foster care ultimately the aim of foster care is to reunite children with their parents, right? And I think that's honorable, and I think that's good. I think we also can agree that there are some people who just through the circumstances of their lives, the positions they're in, are not capable of raising their children, and that those children deserve to be with loving, stable parents who can give them as much as possible. So it's a really tricky conversation because I would never. This is a conversation that I had with a lot of libertarians as I was as combing through my philosophy, because I don't want the state to tell me how to parent. On the other hand, I think we can all look at some circumstances and say you should not have your children. I mean, there are enough terrible cases of fatal abuse of children that I don't need to give you an example, right? Like, we know this happens, and how we navigate that as a culture and society. For me, it's small scale. You need to have communities that are responsible for what's going on there, but that also means you have to know your neighbors and you have to know your values. Adoption I don't know if you want to jump in here, but adoption doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily an easy path. I just think it's something that more people should consider. And I think especially for women who are in a position, if they're not ready to raise a child, that, number one, really is that, are you not wanting to, but you are capable of it? And also, what are your options? Because there is probably someone who would be willing to do that.
And there are a lot of couples that simply cannot conceive, a lot of them.
Yeah.
I was campaigning in Iowa recently, and there was a elderly couple, and I started talking to them and asking what they did, and I asked them if they had children, and she said no, he said no. And I said, if you don't mind my asking, may I ask you why? And she said, he couldn't get me pregnant. He's sitting there. He goes, put
it all on him. Yeah.
And I said, did you guys consider adoption? And they said, we considered it, we decided against it, but looking back at it, we wish we had.
Yeah, it's such a sad thing too, because now you have so many people doing in vitro, which requires for you to create new life that ends up being destroyed in the process, when there are so many children who need a home. I mean, there's so many children out there who could have a family, who could have a loving childhood if they were adopted. And you can make the argument that there are some people who might adopt that child and their life might be less than ideal. Sure, but they're alive. They haven't been killed.
We're also moving towards designer pregnancies with surrogacy and things like that.
I was going to rush Sophia. So I have an article up on Timcast right now because I just couldn't not write it because Sofia Vergara, the Modern Family actress, announced that she's getting divorced. And I can't see her without thinking about the article her ex, Nick Slobe, wrote about his battle to gain essentially custody, although embryos are treated like property, of the frozen embryos that they had created together, that she said, I don't want children out there with my DNA that I'm not raising. I don't want you to raise them, and I don't want to be reclassified as an egg donor. And so those frozen embryos are still on ice and they exist. They are, it's a really, I summarized it in the article. You should all check it out on timcast.com because it's great. Part of it is the argument around when does life begin, and also if you made an agreement. So one of the things I found interesting, maybe you can comment on this, is they had to sign a contract saying, they were always going to use a surrogate, and they were going to mutually consent to have these children born into the world. But there wasn't a contingency, as apparently is required by California state law. I'm not a legal expert. I can't speak to this. For them, they were supposed to make a plan for what happens if they split up, and they did not. And so he wanted the contract voided.
Was the contract executed in California?
I believe so.
So it's an invalid contract now?
They ruled, California judge ruled in her favor. They said that he was aware of this agreement that they agreed to mutually bring the children into the world. So therefore, the fact they broke up was irrelevant.
This is what we call a man-made horror beyond our comprehension. This stuff is just, it's insane.
You're seeing it with celebrities now. It's not even because of an inability to get pregnant. It's that they don't want to damage their body. And the women don't want the stretch marks. They don't want to go through the process of birth. And then there's stories of celebrities who are then saying after the fact, shockingly, I had a hard time connecting with my child after they were born because they didn't actually go through the process of giving birth to the baby.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, there are people who adopt children, and I know people who've adopted children, and what I will say is I can't tell you the statistics on how often they bond, but I would argue it probably happens often. I would imagine they bond pretty well, because when you adopt a child, that's a choice that is made selflessly, right? Whereas there is, and look, I know there are a lot of people I've spoken to and known who have done in vitro and done surrogacies, and I want everyone who hears me saying this, who's done that, to understand, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with your child. I'm glad your child is in the world. If somebody is the victim of abuse and they become pregnant, I think the abuse was wrong, but I'm glad that that child exists, right? So I don't hate you, I don't hate your child, but I really think it's wrong. And I think ultimately it is a selfish decision that results in human life being destroyed. And also it, in some sense, makes it less, it makes it more difficult for children who you could have adopted, who could have had a home, who could have had a loving family, to end up seeing that home because one was made in a Petri dish instead.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say from the research I've done with adoption and the interviews I've listened to with people who adopt, part of it is they know they're adopting. They know this child comes from different circumstances. Maybe the child is, adopted to them right from the hospital. Maybe this child has, been in the world for a little while, and they intentionally cultivate relationships. And they, some people talk about like cocooning. They'll specifically spend a lot of time as a nuclear family, letting this child adjust to it before they venture out into the world. I can't say for sure, but maybe with surrogacy, some people expect, because it is your tissue, that you'll have that experience. And I think pregnancy is a very unique experience, and I think also that's one of the beautiful things about adoption, that people intentionally go into knowing that they are going to maybe have to put a little more work in, but the bonding and love can be just as real.
Yeah, it's a
There
beautiful
is
thing.
something insane about the idea that there are women that make a career now out of being surrogates, right? Like there's
can't
when you
They
actually
get paid for it.
Yeah, like let's just was it Kim Kardashian or something underpaid her surrogate or something like that. Like, and you just think about that, and this is a woman who said she's done it multiple times, and you're just like, that's
Well, she
where we
used
are.
the same surrogate.
What's the going rate?
I don't even know what it was, but the fact that there's a going rate at all.
I've seen it. No, I've
is
seen some of the
insane.
numbers. It's like, and it's look, there is
not a
no
lot.
amount of money. There's no amount of money that makes that worth it. But I've seen some statistics that say like 30,000 for a
30,000
pregnancy.
Less than that or
I
plus
mean,
yeah.
other things, right? So they'll cover your health care. They'll give you extra money for food. If you're Kim Kardashian, so you're probably also paying for her silence. That sounds a little odd, but like you're paying her not to go to the media and be like, I'm Kim Kardashian's surrogate.
Well, since men can get pregnant, I guess it's a
Yeah,
job that men can do too.
It's so, I mean, the whole situation's so sad. This is what we forget. This is part of why a country like this, a free nation, a nation with a market system, can only function with a virtuous population. There are some things you cannot sell. There are some things you should not be able to sell. This is one of those things. Imagine the trauma that a person goes through. Giving birth for a child just to give it away for money, right? We're not talking about, I had this child and you know, I loved them. I didn't want to abort them. I did the right thing by them, but I couldn't take care of them, so I gave them to a family who could. We're talking, I got pregnant to make this money, and now what do you think is going to happen? You think a woman who's pregnant and forming that bond with that child is going to go, well, they're paying me, so now I'm not going to form this spiritual and physical and neurochemical bond with the
There have
child.
been many instances in which the surrogate mother has changed her mind.
Yeah.
And the courts have sided with the surrogate mother.
Yep.
That's good.
Yeah.
That is good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad there's a legal precedent for that then,
yeah.
for siding with the mother. But it's such a sad thing. It's such a sad thing overall. But we are actually going to head over to Super Chats now, where we're going to let the fans ask us some
Super
questions.
Chats.
Yes, so people who chat in, give us a couple dollars.
Okay.
Yeah, here we are. So we have from I'm Not Your Buddy Guy says, it does bother me that many leaders in the West, especially in the U.S., are acting as if they know they can never be removed from power again. That's an interesting point. What do you guys think about
Term
that?
limits.
I don't know that I don't agree with term limits.
I'm just saying we need term limits.
We've had term limits in California for a number of years. The state's gotten bigger and bigger. What happens is the special interests know what's going on. The politicians are trying to figure out where the bathroom is. Next thing you know, they're termed out. But I do believe in term limits for voters. I'm just kidding. After you voted Democrat 2 or 3 times, you lose your right to vote. I proposed that and nobody picked it up. I can't imagine
Can't figure out
Well,
why.
one thing I'll say too, this is part
Nobody
of why
wanted to co-sponsor that bill.
this is kind of the reason why I don't like term limits, because politicians who are going to lie to you and steal from you are a dime a dozen. We're going to get plenty of those, and term limits aren't really going to get rid of those people. But the once in a generation type leaders who actually come around and want to do the right thing, they then only get a few years to lead, when historically, they could be elected and reelected and reelected and reelected because they did such a good
Plus,
job.
it's all about choice. I should have the choice to choose somebody over and over and over again if I want to.
That said, I think there is something to be said, especially when looking at our current political landscape, about there being, cognitive tests and much harsher adherence to standards that would ensure that those in power
You're not referring to Joseph Robinette Biden.
No, we're referring to Dianne Feinstein.
okay.
The thing is, there's like a few people over the past couple years I could have been referring to, but now, yes, Joe Biden. Yeah. This is something I remember hearing my entire childhood. When I was learning about politics in school, when I was learning about the history of the 80s, they would mock the Republicans for having a president, Ronald Reagan, who they claim ended up becoming demented or senile towards the end of his presidency. That may or may not be true. I can't tell you the history there. I can't tell you whether what I was being told in school about that is accurate, but what I can tell you is this is after he was already elected. Joe Biden was clearly in steep cognitive decline during the primaries, and they chose him to be their candidate.
And by the way,
insane.
Reagan's age was an issue when he ran. He was 69 years old when he got elected. Mm-hmm. I am older than that. Mm-hmm. Trump is older than that. Biden is older than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was already
Biden's trying to beat his own record as our nation's oldest president, which just seems
If he were to be elected, if he were to serve out his whole second term, he'd be 87 when he left.
Oh my God.
But this is the media, right? The average voter who is not heavily politically informed doesn't know that this stuff is going on. They don't see the montages.
They know Joe Biden is old.
But they're not seeing the videos of him looking
Heather
clearly.
Claire Tony Bennett just died at 94. Come on.
He could have been president.
Yeah.
96.
Look, every now and
right?
again.
Yeah.
But I don't
Was it
think
96?
Joe
He's
Biden
96.
doesn't.
96. You're
But
right.
hold on.
I'll take it back. 96.
Joe Biden isn't healthy for his age. You know, he's not.
Plus, he can't sing.
But I'm
so-
saying the average
That's also
At least there was some utility behind Tony Bennett.
Well, that's the thing.
He was still productive.
Do you want Tony Bennett singing and dancing until the end of his life? No. Like, where is Joe Biden's family? Be like, hey, man, you've had a long career.
Too much money to
It
be made.
seems like it's
Too
time
much
to
money
step
to be
back.
made.
Well, this is the thing
Yeah,
with
because
Joe
he's a
Biden.
product for them. That's crazy.
I think that it's possible. We don't know why God makes the decision he made or makes. His thoughts are not our thoughts. Joe Biden is an old man who we know has done many horrible things and promoted many horrible things. This could be God's way of giving him as many second chances to repent as possible. Let's hope he takes one of them at some point.
Let me give you my prediction. People are now speculating that Joe Biden won't be able to make it, won't be able to fog up a mirror, and Kamala Harris is even less popular. The nominee, if Joe Biden cannot fog up a mirror, will be Kamala Harris, and here's why. When Bernie Sanders won the Nevada caucuses in 2020, and for a brief shining moment, he became the party's frontrunner, a Democrat socialist. They panicked. James Clyburn, on the eve of the South Carolina primary, endorsed Joe Biden with a promise that his first Supreme Court nominee would be a black female. Joe Biden hired a black female to be his running mate. Gavin Newsom, when it appeared that Dianne Feinstein might not serve out her last term, promised to appoint a black female. To kick aside the first black female who's on base to become the first black female president by a white person like Mayor Pete or Gavin Newsom, black voters will be livid. And the first primary is where? South Carolina. And 60% of the voters are black. Majority of those are black female. And the polls show black females love Kamala Harris. And they resent the mocking of her so-called cackle. They think it's sexist and racist. And they believe that Joe Biden's given her thankless tasks like finding the root causes of illegal immigration. So if you do that and shove her aside for somebody else who's white, black voters won't vote Republican. They just won't vote, thereby guaranteeing that whoever the nominee is on the Republican side, he or she will win. They can't do that. So they are stuck with Biden-Harris.
That is so interesting. I've never heard that analysis before.
So
Thank you.
Can I ask?
Thank you very much. And if I'm wrong, this didn't happen.
Yeah. What would you say? I'm curious. Do you know what the polling data is on black men and Kamala Harris?
I don't. I'm sure she's not as popular among black men as she is among black females. By the way, black men, 20% of them voted for Republicans in 2020.
Well, that's the thing. The share of black men voting Republican has increased since Trump has come on the scene.
Trump got 8% of the black vote in 2016. He got 12% in 2020, 50% increase. But he got 20% of the black male vote.
But I thought Joe Biden said, if you don't Joe Biden, you're not black.
Well,
Yeah,
Joe
that's right.
Biden was raised in the black
and by the way,
church.
he said that on Charlemagne the God show.
Yeah. Yes.
And Charlemagne the God wasn't even insulted.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
If you look at the tape, Biden said, wait. If you don't know if you want to vote for me or vote for Trump, you ain't really black. And Charlemagne wasn't even insulted. Here he is, this white dude who's lied for decades about his civil rights record, claiming that he desegregated movie theaters and restaurants in Delaware. No evidence he ever did it. He was raised in the black church. People in that black church said they never saw him. He's lied and lied and lied. Said he tried to visit Nelson Mandela during apartheid South Africa. No evidence of it. He's lied for decades about his civil rights record and tells you, Charlemagne the God, a black man who's down with the brothers, you ain't really black if you don't want to vote for me. And he wasn't even insulted.
Well, and not
But
only
I am the black face of white supremacy. Yeah.
not only has Biden lied about his civil rights record, but he openly, publicly stated very early on in his career that he wasn't marching in Selma. He made all sorts of statements early on, distancing himself from the civil rights movement. And now today he says the whole reason I got into politics was the civil rights movement. And I was like, what, to oppose it?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
He said the reason he ran was because
Charlottesville.
that guy, Donald Trump, he said there were good guys and bad guys on the side of being fascists. And of course, Donald Trump never said anything like that. He said the opposite. He said, quote, and I'm not talking about the white nationalists and neo-Nazis because they should be condemned totally, end of quote.
that's right.
Even Jake Tapper, 2 years after the incident, said, I went back and looked at the tape, and Donald Trump was talking about the debate on whether or not there should be a Confederate monument in the public square. And then 2 days after Jake Tapper said it, Biden is on CNN and says it again, and nobody said a word.
Just blatantly lied.
Yep.
Typical Sleepy Joe. That one gamer said, I'm proud to say that Larry was my first vote in LA County in the gubernatorial recall. Just curious as to what Larry's thoughts are on gun control.
What do you think? I'm a Second Amendment guy. Interesting. We're talking about Donald Trump a moment ago. How many times have the Democrats referred to him as a tyrant or a dictator or a fascist? I ask you, gentlemen and lady, what is the purpose of the Second Amendment?
To keep and bear arms to fight tyranny.
Hello? Yeah. So, if you believe Donald Trump is a tyrant, why in the world would you want further gun control restrictions when, after all, the amendment is designed to prevent somebody like Donald Trump, the tyrant, from taking power? Exactly. You ought to be hoping that more law-abiding people have more guns.
It seems like the tyrant would be the one saying,
which means,
give me your guns.
Which means either they're lying and being a demagogue when they refer to him as a tyrant, or they have no clue what the Second Amendment's really for.
They don't know what the Second Amendment's for.
Either way, it's bad.
Yeah, they don't know what the Second Amendment's for.
Yeah.
They don't actually believe that that's, they don't understand anything about well-regulated militia, and it's open to their interpretation, which is just not the accurate interpretation of that. Yeah.
Raymond G. Stanley Jr. says, Hannah Claire, is it me, or was Lindell mad sketchy today? A lot of huff and puff, ... Well done this week, y'all. Not even one YouTube strike.
Thank you guys so much. I mean, first off,
what's he referring to?
Yeah.
Well, this morning I hosted our Culture War show, which is a debate program, and I had Matt Brainerd on, and he wanted to talk to Mike Lindell about election security, and really it was supposed to be about early voter turnout. There was a lot of heated back and forth, and I will say it's not that I thought Mike Lindell was sketchy. It's just that I think there was a lot of I feel like I shouldn't review the debate, but I feel like there was a lot of tension in the room. They're both people who feel really strongly and passionately about what they do. And occasionally it felt like they were going back and forth about, well, you're questioning me. Well, you're questioning me. But I am ultimately so grateful to have the opportunity to have people who want to see, their parties have victory, and they want to see change in America. So Mike Lindell really wants to find ways to have more secure elections, to make sure that your vote matters. And Matt Brainerd is of course advocating for early voting because he says, these are the tools we have at hand, and we need to push forward with that. And I think it's an important conversation, but lively, very, very lively. Serge and I think both had to get our ears checked afterward.
It's interesting that the Democrats have, quote, put democracy on the ballot when they refer to people like Donald Trump, who believes that the election was stolen, as undermining our republic. For the entirety of Trump's term, Hillary Clinton referred to him as illegitimate, said the election was stolen.
That's right.
Nobody called her an election denier. And Jay Johnson, Obama's DHS secretary, testified under oath that while the Russians tried, they failed to change a single vote tally in 2016. There was a YouGov poll. 2/3, 66% of Democrats believe the Russians, quote, changed vote tallies, close quote, to elect Donald Trump.
That's right. Yeah.
Zero evidence of it.
Yeah.
So who's being deluded?
Poll.
A greater percentage of those guys believe that 2016 was stolen than we feel 2020 was stolen. But nobody calls them election deniers.
Well, when they claimed the election was stolen, we investigated the candidate. When Republicans claimed the election was stolen, they investigated the Republicans. So that's all you need to know about that. Noah Sanders says, when are these Timcast beanies going to be available for at least members? Give the people what they want, Potato Man. Firstly, I don't appreciate the slur against my Irish ethnicity.
That was very rude.
That was a hate crime.
Potato Man.
I think that's a hate crime. Secondly, what do you mean? This is just how we normally dress. What are they talking about?
I don't know, Tim. I'm not really sure. Tim, do you know?
By the way, why is it okay to call the Notre Dame Fighting Irish? Why aren't people upset about that?
I think no one's even willing to come to the defense of the idea that that stereotype's not true. They're like, no, that's just how they are.
But I assume you don't find that offensive.
No, I don't. It's actually funny because I remember being a little kid and seeing it and finding it offensive. And then I was like, Mom, look at that. And she laughed at it. She's like, oh, it's funny.
Right.
And then I was like, okay, I guess that's what we do when people make fun of our people. I said, Mom, how dare you? I said, you're a self-hating Irish.
I've not heard anybody complain about it. Don't get me wrong. I just wonder why.
No, it's a good question. No, I agree with you. It's because it's stupid to complain. Who cares? It's a little joke. It's a little caricature.
But the Washington Redskins, that's got to go.
But yeah, that's horrible.
That's got to go.
Dude, well, it's funny because
Cleveland Indians, got to go.
This guy, there's a funny picture of a Native American dude wearing a shirt that says like the Caucasians, and liberals are like, oh, how would you feel about that? I was like, every white person I know thinks that's funny.
That was really funny.
I think that's a funny joke.
The Cleveland Caucasians.
I've actually talked to a friend of mine who's Native American, and one of the reasons they say that why it's less offensive for the Fighting Irish is because there were people of Irish extraction that were on the board of the school, so it's not seen that way. Whereas when these other organizations were formed, whether we're not talking about not the Redskins, but if we're talking about the Indians, right? Like the idea is they had the first Native American players.
That's right. And
baseball,
it was
right?
named after him.
Exactly.
It was to honor this guy.
But now they're saying that there's nobody in the front office.
His name was Sokolexis.
Yes.
Sokolexis.
And then him, and then two more right after that, right?
So they were doing it to honor him. They weren't doing it to even talk about a tribe or anything.
Too much time.
So what's the
passed.
problem?
Yeah.
But this never comes up. I feel like this is the first I've ever heard this information.
But the reason is what they're saying is that because there's nobody in the front office that actually has voting power for the team, that makes it offensive.
There was
whereas
no
on the boards,
representation of
yes.
Native
Whereas
Americans. Yes, so-
on the board of Notre Dame, you're going to have
They're
somebody
just
who's
representing the players who are on the team.
Right.
yes.
But that representation
Yeah.
is irrelevant.
Celtics is okay too, right?
Well,
Yes.
I
Well, except we're
I have a
pronouncing it
theory
wrong.
about
It's
this.
It's Celtics. Yeah, I know.
I have a theory about this, which is, okay, so when you have a good friendship with somebody, you can make fun of them, you can poke fun at each other, and it's fine. Right. If you're in a healthy relationship with someone, your girlfriend or your wife, you can tease each other, you can make fun of each other. But sometimes you see that couple who joke about each other and they're clearly being nasty and trying to disguise it as banter, and it's extremely uncomfortable. I think where we are as a nation today with racial politics is we are that second couple where you make a joke, and maybe even in the moment the joke you're making is just lighthearted, but because the relationship's gotten so sour, people are angered by it. People think you're making a dig, whereas when the races are actually getting along, we're able to make fun of each other. It's actually a sign of health when different racial groups can make fun of each other for things that are unique to that group.
And again, if it's your friend group, I think that's one of the differences, right? When we're talking about the internet, these are people you don't know in the real world. If it's your friend group, that's different.
Unless your friends throw you overboard. Let's take Bill Maher. Remember when Bill Maher made that joke where he was talking to Senator, I think it was Josh Hawley, and he said, I would have been a House N-word.
Yeah.
And he got hammered, and Ice Cube goes on his show and says, I knew you were going to F up at some point. He got hammered. Now, Bill Maher prides himself on his friendship with blacks, has a lot of black friends. I'm confident privately they shoot the N-word back and forth all the time. So he said it in a joking way. I thought it was funny. And he got hammered, and not a single one of his black friends stood up and said, yo, come on. Bill's down with us. We joke like this all the time. They threw him under the bus.
Yeah. I mean, you're right that that's very possible, especially because if someone's going to say that on television to a black person, the idea that they haven't tested that with their own little market research behind the scenes.
He said it to a white person, a senator.
Oh, I
Josh Hawley
of Missouri.
Yeah.
Oh,
Josh
there were
Hawley.
no black people on the show.
It was even funnier. He said, well, you would have been, I forget how it came up. You would have been a slave. He said, no, I would have been a House N-word.
Something like that.
And it was funny. I thought it was funny. And what I'm saying is none of his black friends stood up and said, come on, it was funny, A, and B, Bill Maher and I were good friends. He's down with the people. We say this kind of stuff privately all the time. It was an innocent joke. Nobody backed him up. They all threw him under the bus. So they didn't want to get canceled by the black community.
That's crazy.
We have one from Bruce Maximus. For Mr. Elder, would allowing churches or similar to establish boarding schools to enact culture transplant under the school choice initiatives be able to ameliorate some modern moral degradation?
Do I believe that churches should set up schools to teach people stuff? Yes.
They don't need school choice technically to do that.
The church that I go to has all sorts of schools, camps, and things like that. I'm encouraging churches to get involved.
I mean, it's crazy that we ever decided that education should be the primary responsibility and duty of the state, right? This is what families should do, and it's what
for the
private schools
majority
should do.
of our nation's history, it was not.
Yeah.
It was done by communities, organizations in the community, and there's no evidence that with the state took it over, the equality has gotten any better.
What was the reason? I mean, did this have a lot to do with cities expanding?
Had everything to do with people wanting to get paid more.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't sure if I didn't want to interrupt you.
I had a brilliant thought, and you.
No, go ahead. Give it.
No, it's gone. It's dissipated.
hate that.
It's all my fault.
Gone forever.
I'm a
How
horrible
could
host.
you do this?
The collective IQ of the whole audience has now gone down 5 points.
Look
all
what you
because
guys
of
did.
Seamus.
You
all because
robbed
of
us.
Seamus.
It's not my
yes.
fault.
Yes, it is.
It's not my fault at all.
Robbed us of this
It's
moment.
because
It's the fault of the Fighting
they're-
Irish.
It's the racism
I
I'm
knew
subject
it all
to
along.
every day
That's
on
right.
this show.
That's
This
right.
is unbelievable.
Racism has reared its ugly head.
This is how I end my
podcast.
week.
Yes.
This
It's
whole
sad.
week I'm working
It's
hard to
sad.
host
Yeah.
for
The black
Tim.
face
Yeah.
of white supremacists.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
You really are the blackface
That's
of
right.
white supremacy, calling me the
race
fighting
card. Do
Irish.
not leave home without it.
Look, here's the thing about the race card. I'm Irish, which means we weren't considered white until being white meant you had to apologize for being white. So we got in at the worst possible moment. Unbelievably frustrating.
I'm also Slavic, which I've been told means that I am a person of color.
You actually are, according to some. Yeah.
And we just had Gay Pride Month. We should have a Take It Easy on the White Man Month.
I would agree. I think that should be every month.
Lighten up on Whitey Month.
Exactly.
As president, would you enact?
It's brutal. It's brutal.
It is brutal, man. It's rough
It
out
is
here
not
for
a
us.
good year to be a white male.
It has been for a couple years, though. I'm just going to say.
a couple years.
Yeah. we have,
Sometime now, you guys have had some problems.
Yeah.
we have, well, like I said, we've been talking about this. It's okay to bash white people. It's okay to bash men. It's okay to bash straight people. It's okay to bash Christians. Not only okay, actually, that's too light. We say it's okay. It's not okay. Like, you're required to.
Yeah.
You are actually required to hate white people, to hate men, to hate the family, to hate Christians.
Well, Seamus, they've held power for too long.
That's right.
Well, I know.
Time's up.
Done. Those white men just gotta get out of the way and let the rest of us have a voice. It's one of these crazy things. Every now and again, you'll have some award ceremony that people cry about giving a majority of their awards to white people, and it ends up being proportionate to the population. So it's like, they gave 65% of their awards to white people. It's like, well, yeah, that's because like 65% of people in the country. Okay, never mind. It's like, we don't.
No, we can't talk about the proportion of the country.
We can't do
There
per
are
capita.
a lot of white people in this country. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah,
There's a boatload of them.
No, I've noticed far too many, and it really bothers me. That's the other thing too. They can literally cheer about that.
Don't worry, they're a
was
global
footage-
minority, so you don't have to stress about it.
And that can be cheered for, right? When somebody says, like, yeah, statistically in the United States, if trends continue, white people are going to be a minority, like, left-wing people will celebrate that. Could you imagine celebrating that about any other group of people? Sickening. It's really sickening. We had a super chat pulled up here, but then I guess you could say I lost my train of thought. Here we go. Bruce Maximus. For Mr. Elder, would you then consolidate all taxes into one figure? That is, remove corporate tax and place it in the income tax, as the consumer pays it either way, so better to make it apparent.
Well, you don't want to know what I would do if I were in charge. I will tell you, if I were in charge, I would limit taxes to what the founding fathers intended, which is, as I said earlier, the limited limited duties, powers of government. Government would be so small that its obligations would be funded on duties and tariffs, which is what the founding fathers intended. The Constitution had to be amended for the income tax. If you look at the Constitution, none of this stuff, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, none of that was envisioned by the founding fathers.
And can I ask you this?
If I could rule the world, which I can't, I'd put it back to that.
Do you think it would be possible? You mentioned that you wanted spending to be at 10% of GDP. Do you think it would be possible to have that much revenue with those policies?
Yes. If you look at some of the things that we, meaning the government, operates, whether it's Amtrak, whether it's the national parks, there are lots of things that could be leased. The Hoover Dam, I could go on and on and on about things that the government is running that the private sector could run, and we could generate fees and meet the small, limited obligations that the federal government is supposed to have. Yes, it could be done.
Okay, here's, is this one? This is, so from Dan Sherman, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, from Roma Nation, do you think there's a possibility that the reason Biden was chosen by the, quote, deep state, unquote, was to fix the issues that he created with the Ukraine scandal so it doesn't expose other people in the government doing the same thing?
I think Tim said something like that last week.
But here's the thing. Our government's been doing a lot of meddling in Ukraine, and there are a lot of political leaders who have an incentive to cover that up. It's not like Joe Biden's the only person who would be able to do that. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Regarding Ukraine in general, Putin has already lost this war. When the invasion started, I watched a lot of television. I watched a lot of these pundits, including on Fox. They all thought the invasion would take 2 or 3 days, maybe a couple of weeks, and then Ukraine would be flattened. The only issue was how far Putin would go. Would he threaten the NATO countries and invoke Article 5? This is now deep into the second year. Putin has lost at least 200,000 troops. That would be the equivalent of us losing 400,000 troops. 20 generals have been killed either on the battlefield or have disappeared. There's been an attempted coup. His hold on power has never been more tenuous. He's looking for an off-ramp. We ought to give him one.
We have here from Satasha Catergator. Keeping families together and promoting the Catholic sense of subsidiarity would solve a myriad of socioeconomic issues. Completely agreed, by the way.
Catholic agreeing with the Catholic, how interesting.
Shocking.
Also, there's a conspiracy.
An echo chamber.
Also, hold on.
Conspiracy.
Her and I clearly don't always agree on everything, because she just said, also, I want to publicly apologize for accusing Seamus of stealing anything. Thank you. I appreciate that. I deserved that.
She accused you of stealing something?
So I've been accused of stealing spoons from Tim. There's been a heinous smear campaign. People
talked about
have been
it today
making
on the
stories
show.
up about me. It's really just not acceptable. And so I have been maintaining my innocence. You guys know me. You know I wouldn't
You
do
weren't
something
stealing.
like
You were
this.
just an undocumented shopper.
I wasn't even an undocumented shopper. You guys know me. You know I wouldn't do something like that. I would never do something like that.
I still have yet to see Seamus use a spoon. I just want to say that.
There we go. Look at that.
What,
She's
he uses
validating
his
my
fingers?
point.
I've seen him use forks. I've seen him use
I
knives.
see.
I've never
So he
seen
does-
him use
so
a
he-
spoon.
So he does use cutlery.
Yes,
Okay,
he
good.
is civilized enough to
Civilized.
use
And
cutlery.
Yeah, I've never, and there you have it from the one of the best journalists, if I do say so myself, here at Timcast, that I didn't do anything. It's what
One
you
of the
just
best
said. Those were her
journalists in
words.
this room, at the very least.
No, I wouldn't go that
I
far.
said one of the
definitely.
one of the best.
The only,
in this
the
room.
only
Calm
one.
down.
The only one.
Yes,
No,
thank you for admitting that I am the only journalist in this room. And by that I normally say I'm a writer at timcast.com.
That's unbelievable.
No, I've been endorsed by a presidential candidate. You guys can't stop me now.
That's right.
Well, that's
You're gonna
because
be my
I'm
press-
speaking.
my
That's
press
because
secretary when
that's
I-
because
There
I'm
you
speaking
go.
truth to power.
I'm
That's because
in.
I'm speaking truth to power.
No, I have a new job now. I'm a future press secretary.
You're good enough at BSing to be a press secretary. I think you can do it.
So if you want HC to be my press secretary, I need 40,000 individual donors. Give me $1. Go to LarryOlder.com. Make sure I get up there on that debate stage to make sure that she becomes my press secretary.
I now have stake in this game,
That's
guys.
right.
I need
That's right.
40,000.
You have to
of you
do it now
Just
if you
to
get
all
elected.
give
I've
$1.
incentivized her.
You have to
By the way,
do
you know,
that
one
if
of the
you
candidates is
elect.
offering a $20 gift certificate for every $1 donation.
What is this? The COVID vaccine?
And another one is offering a quote free concert if you donate $1. Another one is giving donors a commission to seek other potential donors.
Well,
I'm not doing that.
These seem like good deals.
I'm doing it the old-fashioned way. I'm asking people for their support.
What's the concert? Is it Taylor Swift?
It's a country western concert. Some guy
I don't
that's
know.
not my genre.
I would
but-
consider if it's Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you.
All right.
Those tickets are going for.
I know it's not Taylor
pretty
Swift.
penny.
Okay,
Yeah.
then I'm back to running for press secretary.
Back to running president.
We have Chad Cunego, author, who said, instead of term limits, what about having term penalties? In other words, for every term you win, you have to win by a higher percentage at the next election.
I've never heard that before.
I mean,
that's creative.
It is creative, and I
He's
think it's a
outside
better
the box.
idea. Yeah, I think it's a better idea than term limits, but I also don't think that would be ideal. I'll think about it more, though. Dan Sherman said, the term limits could be like a 401k vesting. An elected official needs to serve so many years to get benefits. Don't get reelected, no benefits. Yeah, I mean, look. Yeah, you
The
go
problem
ahead.
with all these ideas, Seamus, is that we ultimately get the government that we vote for. It's the people who are voting these guys. Tax, spend, regulate, grow the government, and you keep putting them back there and back there and back there. California is a prime example. We're having a huge homeless problem. Our schools are near the bottom. The average price of a home is 175% above the national average. People are leaving for the first time, and yet they still keep voting these people back in. 2/3 of the state assembly are Democrats. 2/3 of the state senate are Democrats. Republicans need not even show up for work, and they can pass one job-killing bill after another.
Crucidist Viewing says, Larry, do you believe the Civil Rights Act is constitution or even good in a utilitarian sense?
That's an interesting question. I believe that had we not passed the Civil Rights Bill, eventually Jim Crow would have fallen of its own merit because nobody would have gone to a restaurant, nobody would have gone to a state where we have Jim Crow laws. So it sped up something that I think would have happened ultimately anyway.
Yeah, well, I think there's a good argument to be made that companies want to be able to serve a wider variety of people, and these laws being imposed on them actually made it harder for them to make a profit. So not even from the perspective of them wanting to care about helping people, you could just imagine companies wanting to lobby and push against these on the basis of it costing them money.
You know, and these private companies, private bus companies, they wanted to be able to serve everybody.
Of course.
The government had to stop them from doing it, which is what the Jim Crow laws did. Plessy v. Ferguson was 1986. The case started because the railroads wanted to be able to service black people. So they had a light-skinned black person sit in the whites-only area so that they would start a lawsuit they thought they were going to win. The private sector wanted people to be able to be comfortable because they wanted to make money.
Well, and you can also imagine for buses or other forms of public transit at this time, especially in the South, with the economic disparity that existed between black people and white people, it would be less likely for a black person to own a car. So you actually had a larger customer base there that they were forced by the government to discriminate against. So there was every incentive on their part not to do this. We have from Carlo Mango TV, Mr. Elder, how can we save California, or are we doomed like Sodom and Gomorrah?
Well, I liken it to a drug addict. You got to hit rock bottom, and at that point, you begin to rethink your assumptions. Apparently, California has not yet hit rock bottom. I still am convinced most voters are commonsensical, and if you can explain to them that it is in their best interest to do X, Y, and Z, they will. I believe that the captain of the Titanic would have taken evasive action had he known iceberg is ahead. It's our job to tell them, hey, voters, iceberg ahead. Take evasive action.
Well, we are a minute over, so it's about time.
Do I get overtime?
No, you don't.
Do I get overtime?
Maybe I
don't
do.
know.
I'll ask.
You know,
I'll see if we can
slavery's
figure
over.
this out. This
Slavery's
is
over.
unbelievable.
Slavery's over. Maybe they should bring it back. I wouldn't have to work so hard.
I would like to
Come on,
thank all of you.
Shimcast.
Why is
What are
everything
these
pointed at me?
conditions?
Yeah.
Listen.
Because
okay.
you put your name on the show this week.
You sucked
Actually,
a whole minute
the
out of my life. I'll
creator
never get
of
back.
that show decided to put my name on it because you knew I was the best person for the job, Hannah Claire. That's just how meritocracy works. I want you all to smash that
By the way,
like button.
I have a book called As Goes California.
Oh no, yeah, I'm still going to give you time to plug your stuff. I just
okay.
want to let the audience know.
Plug my stuff. All right.
Yeah, of course. Become a
my
member.
stuff. Internet speak.
If you want, all of your work.
Sounds like
Become a member at timcast.com. That's what I was asking all of you to do.
Desperately holding
Mr.
on to
Heller,
control of the
I will
show.
just let
Plug
you
my
go.
stuff. Man.
The things you're trying
Sounds
to
like
promote.
a sexual device. I'm
This
not
is-
sure.
gross.
Contraceptive device.
You know what? You got to get your mind out of the gutter.
So become a member at timcast.com.
Disgusting.
With your best
Just
people
become a
are.
member. Thank you for joining us, Larry. Anything you'd like to promote?
Yes, please go to my website, larryolder.com. Contribute $1 so I can get up there on that debate stage and plug my stuff. I've got a book called As Goes California, My Mission to Rescue the Golden State and Save America. It comes out in September. You can pre-order it on Barnes & Noble or on Amazon.com.
Well, this was delightful. I am the only journalist in this room, as said by
That's
Mr.
not
Larry
true.
Elder. And apparently,
He's
I could
wrong.
be your future press secretary. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute delight, both an extremely informed and very fun conversation. I first and foremost think we should all give a shout out to Seamus, who has
Yo, Seamus!
really
Thank
just
you.
held
Yes,
everything.
thank you.
Right.
You guys are
If you guys don't know, Seamus runs his own company, Freedom Tunes. He has his own life, as it turns out, and also he really just did incredible work this week. And I'm so grateful to have been able to be on the show with you every night. So
Yeah.
great work.
Well, you were a massive help, by the way.
No.
Hannah Claire and I would have like study sessions where we would get stories ready, and so couldn't have done it without you.
You know,
you
it
were
takes
tremendous help.
It takes a village to replace Tim Pool, so we really all just tried
That's
to
true.
pull together. And again, thank you guys all for joining us all week, for putting up with some slight changes, and for our quirky personalities. We really do it all for you. And speaking of which, I'm incredibly grateful that all of you who became members and support my work on timcast.com and the work of all the other journalists. You should follow at Timcast News on Twitter and Instagram. Check us out on the read tab of timcast.com. Again, made possible by you, and I'm very proud of the work that Adrian Norman, Chris Bertman, Cassandra Fairbanks, McDonald, and Chris Carr and I do. If there's anyone else I'm forgetting on the team, I'm very sorry. If you want to follow me personally, you can find me on Twitter at HC Brimlow. You can find me on Instagram, hannahclaire.b, and you can check out the latest episode of Culture World. Thanks so much.
All right, guys. Oh, wait, sorry. Guys, no.
Tell us about the South Side of Chicago.
Yes, about
What was the South Side like?
Yes, at Brett Dasovic on both Twitter and Instagram. Please go and check out Pop Culture Crisis Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Me and Mary have a lot of fun over there. Come join us.
Can I just 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wanna
I'm on
plug
Twitter
something?
at Larry Elder. I'm on Instagram. I am on Truth Social. I'm on Threads. I have a question for Seamus.
Yes.
Why is it, we're talking about your name and how you got your name.
Yes, sir.
Why is it that private detectives are called Seamuses?
You know why? It's
that
because of a hurtful racial stereotype that white people were more likely, or that Irish people were more likely to become members of law enforcement. Something like
didn't know
that.
that.
Yeah, I think that detectives are more likely to be Irish. And there is the
Racism is
stereotype about
alive and
Irish
well in
police. I know.
America.
It hurts me. It pains me deeply. I think it's because people named Seamus are really good at figuring stuff out.
Okay, Scooby-Doo. Serge.
This has been a fun week. It has been stressful, but I feel like we did well, Seamus. Good job.
Yeah, man, and you did an awesome job, by the way. Serge was this whole week giving me cues and just extremely helpful.
And
So
Serge
thank
passed
you.
me the Post-it note while I was on.
Yes.
When we first started. I don't have my glasses. I couldn't read this.
You figured it
I
out.
just want you to know, Seamus was going. So okay, so that, yeah.
And the professional
Serge.
radio host figured out he needed to read it to his
So
mic.
Serge, I need big letters. Okay.
Yeah.
It isn't that I can't read. I just need big letters.
Totally. I need to get
Very
bigger
well.
Post-it notes.
And I was
We're
going
gonna
like
start
this. I was
throwing
going
little
like
hand
this. What
cards.
is this?
Bigger Post-it notes are
Yes.
bigger paper cranes.
Would you
just for
please?
Oh yeah, good point.
Would you please fill the top of your?
It was just so you tilt the mic
Would you
slightly.
please fill the top of your
Tilt. Oh
so
yeah,
it faces.
I
Would
write
you
terribly.
Would you please fill your face?
Why do you communicate with other Post-it
Yeah.
notes?
Also insulting your handwriting.
Yeah. No, I understand. I wrote terribly, but you guys can follow me at Twitter, and I won't write stuff in my handwriting. I'll use the
Thank you.
type of the computer. Anyways, thanks. Cheers.
What a way to end
Yes.
Shimcast this wonderful week. I want to ask all of you guys, because I have to make some plugs as well. Go over to freedomtunes.com. Become a member if you like me, if you like what I do, if you want to support artists who are creating content, who aren't woke, who are trying to push back against the left-wing narrative, and just make entertaining stuff. Go to freedomtunes.com. Become a member. You will get an extra cartoon each week that people on the main YouTube channel don't. I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you want to see more of me podcasting, check out my Rumble podcast, Shamer. Go on over there, subscribe. Thank you all so much, and I will see you when I'm back on the show eventually.
Andy, when that
And as we say in the hood, boom shaka laga laga, boom shaka laga. All right?